The recent actions of the Trump administration to deport immigrants without any due process, it's scary. Some of these people are being sent to gulags in El Salvador. These are concentration camps. It's only been 3 months.
I have friends that are here on visas. I know people that weren't born here. It's terrifying. They could just say, I'm not a citizen. There's no due process, so you can't, it doesn't matter if you have a birth certificate.
They have revoked student visas at my school in particular, at Wayne State. Students are being taken out of their homes from University of Michigan. This is going to target everyone.
We're watching this all over the world. I'm watching this here from Australia. We're all thinking this is outrageous.
When one country started to show signs of fascism, it will spread like a contagious disease. So we're not just defending Americans, we're defending people all over the world.
Our brothers and sisters will be exploited and detained and disappeared. These are things that Hitler did 80 years ago.
Und gerade durch diesen Aspekt der Lager, Konzentrationslager und der Massendeportation ein zentrales Element war. Und dass das halt jetzt so wiederkommt im 20. Jahrhundert, ist natürlich schrecklich.
We remember the Holocaust and we remember what it brought to us and brought to socialists, a lot of Jews and just minorities. It didn't affect a lot of people at first, but in the end, everybody who was against the regime was in a concentration camp.
The attack on immigrants is the starting point of a much larger picture.
It's really hard to sit back and watch. We can't let this happen.
Basic constitutional rights are not compatible with an oligarchy controlling the world and demanding ever greater share of the profits.
Everybody works full-time in addition to being a full-time student. The current disparity in wealth distribution is disgusting.
All of the elites, all of the owners of all the companies, they're all working together. If we want to combat that, then we have to all work together.
They're attacking the working class at home so that they can pursue a military war abroad. The funding has to come from somewhere, and it's not going to come from Mark Zuckerberg or Jeff Bezos. It's going to come from the millions of workers.
There's not a bourgeois party that exists that's going to be able to stop what's happening. And with the threat of nuclear war, the stakes are so much higher.
The idea of being drafted for a war that more likely than not will go nuclear, it's nightmarish.
We all have the same problem. We all need to get together and we need to fight against this fascism and all capitalism system.
There's no way of getting around it. It has to be a united fight against capitalism because we're all affected by it in all different sectors in every country in the world. I think now is a time to be building a real socialist movement.
We already see what it's like to see children drenched in their own blood and dust from the rubbles of their own towns that are being destroyed now. It stops with us. We've seen enough history. We've seen enough war. I see a world where the workers can actually truly live in peace. Now, I don't see any oligarchs being part of that equation.
The working class stands as the only class capable of waging war against war in fascism.
As we begin this May Day celebration of May 2025, the International Committee of the Fourth International, the World Party of Socialist Revolution, proclaims its solidarity with all those who are being deprived of their democratic right to freedom and even to life by capitalist states and their police agencies throughout the world. The International Committee calls on workers and youth to expand the fight for the freedom of Ukrainian socialist Bogdan Siratyuk, who has been imprisoned for 1 year and is awaiting trial on charges of treason, that is, fighting for the unity of Ukrainian and Russian workers and youth in opposition to the proxy war instigated by US and European imperialism and against the reactionary national chauvinism by the regimes in Kiev and Moscow. We declare our solidarity with the people of Gaza, who are being subjected to the campaign of genocidal violence launched by the criminal Israeli regime, which is acting with the support of all the imperialist governments. The International Committee and its affiliated Socialist Equality Parties pledge to continue the fight for the mobilization of the working class in support of the struggle of the Palestinian people against the Israeli capitalist state. We repeat our call for the working class and youth in Israel to repudiate the murderous ideology and political blind alley of Zionist chauvinism, and to unite with their Arab brothers and sisters in the struggle for a socialist Palestine and a socialist federation of the Middle East. The Socialist Equality Party in the United States demands the immediate return of Mahmoud Khalil, Rumeysa Öztürk, and Leyla Kadia, seized by the agents of Trump's Gestapo, to their homes in the United States. We demand the immediate end to the persecution of all students and teachers who are exercising the right to freedom of speech, guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution to citizens and non-citizens alike. We denounce the deportation of hundreds of migrants living in the United States, such as Andrei Hernandez Romero and Kilmar Armando Abrego Garcia, to a concentration camp in El Salvador. 20 years ago, the world was shocked by the publication of photos that exposed the torture of Iraqis in the prison of war camp at Abu Ghraib. The Bush administration sought to evade direct responsibility for the sadistic abuse of Iraqi soldiers by attributing the crimes to the unauthorized acts of individual miscreants. No such evasion of responsibility is even being attempted today. The Trump administration boasts of its plans to deport thousands of migrants now living in the United States to El Salvador's notorious terrorism confinement center, known as CICOT. This facility, designed to hold 40,000 human beings, is the equivalent of a concentration camp. The cells hold 65 to 156 prisoners, where they are confined for 23 and a half hours each day under perpetual artificial lighting. They sleep on metal bunks, without mattresses, pillows, or sheets. The inmates are subjected to beatings and deprived of adequate food and necessary medical care. They are systematically humiliated, and there have been reports of torture, including the use of electric shocks. When the president of El Salvador, Nayib Bukele, visited the White House in April, President Trump publicly declared his intention to deport homegrown Americans, that is, U.S. citizens, to CICOT, and stated that it would be necessary to build 5 more camps to accommodate the tens of thousands that Trump is threatening to deport. Among the recent victims of Trump's dragnet are 3 children, ages 2, 4, and 7, all American citizens, who have been deported to Honduras. One of the children is a 4-year-old who has been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. The child was deported without medication and access to medical care. As we observe May Day 2025, it is necessary to place events in the appropriate historical context. This May Day coincides with the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II in Europe. On May 8, 1945, the Nazi regime capitulated. This was followed 3 months later by the surrender of Japan, which occurred after the incineration of Hiroshima and Nagasaki by atomic bombs dropped by the United States. The 6 years of the Second World War, between 1939 and 1945, witnessed barbarism on a scale that surpassed anything that the world had previously experienced. The opening of the concentration camps in Europe exposed the enormity of fascist barbarism. The genocide of European Jewry, the implementation of a systematically planned campaign of industrial mass murder, was only one horrifying part of the global violence unleashed by capitalism. The war claimed 70 to 85 million lives, approximately 3% of the world's population. Military deaths are estimated at between 21 to 25 million, civilian deaths at between 50 to 55 billion. In the aftermath of the war, the victors claimed that the horrors of that conflict could not be allowed to happen again. At the Nuremberg trial of 1945-46, the American prosecutors proclaimed that the new laws that held the Nazi leaders accountable for genocide and crimes against peace would be invoked in the future against leaders of any nation, including the United States, that committed similar acts. Of course, that pledge was forgotten. In the decades that followed World War II, the leaders of the imperialist powers waged wars that have resulted in the deaths of millions. But even taking into account the bloody record of imperialist crimes, it is clear that the present world order is undergoing a process of staggering political and moral regression. In the midst of the First World War, Lenin warned that the regime of imperialism tends toward the obliteration in practice between absolutist and democratic regimes. The rule, he said, is, and I quote, reaction all down the line. That rule is being substantiated by contemporary events. The crime of genocide is being implemented against the people of Gaza before the eyes of the entire world. The Nazi bombing of Guernica in 1937 and of Rotterdam in 1940 were viewed as depraved acts that could be committed only by a criminal state. But the systematic annihilation of Gaza, upon whose defenseless inhabitants 2,000-pound bombs are being dropped, is defended by the democratic governments of Europe, North America, Australia, and New Zealand. Far from condemning Israel, the imperialist powers, ignoring the findings of the International Criminal Court, denounce and criminalize the protests of students and workers against genocide. With a level of deceit and cynicism that was believed to be practiced only by totalitarian regimes, words are twisted and given a meaning that is the opposite of their original and objective connotation. And so, the denunciation of genocide is now proclaimed to be anti-Semitism, and Jewish people who participate in demonstrations against the Nazi-like campaign of mass murder are denounced as anti-Semites. In the aftermath of the collapse of the Nazi regime, countless academics argue that the Third Reich was a bizarre historical event, something like an unforeseeable car accident that defied logical explanation. Attempting to refute Marxism and absolve capitalism and its ruling elites of responsibility for the catastrophe, it was argued that the cause of fascism was not to be found in capitalist economics and imperialist geopolitics, but in psychology. That is, in the irrational character of human consciousness. Such explanations provided no scientifically grounded insight into the real cause of the disasters of the 1930s and 1940s, and they are no less useless in explaining the events that are currently unfolding. 80 years after the collapse of the Nazi regime and the end of World War II, constitutional democracy is breaking down. The influence and power of fascist politicians are growing. All the imperialist powers are massively increasing military expenditures. German political leaders speak of the need to prepare for a new war with Russia before the end of the decade. Mankind stands closer to a nuclear war than at any time since the end of World War II. The essential causes of the descent into political barbarism and catastrophic global warfare are the same economic and social contradictions of the capitalist regime that resulted in war and fascism in the last century. These interrelated contradictions are, first, the incompatibility of the world economy with the capitalist nation-state system, and second, the socially destructive character of capitalist private ownership of the productive forces, controlled by money-mad oligarchs, and social production involving the labor of the billions of people that comprise the international working class. These contradictions operate today on a scale and intensity several orders of magnitude greater than those that led to the First and Second World War. The sovereignty of national economies has been dissolved by a vast global production network. The production of commodities involves a process that integrates the labor of workers from all over the world. Attempts to identify the specific national origin of a vast portion of commodities are all but absurd. While invoking the sanctity of the national economy and proclaiming nationally based production as its supreme ideal, the real goal of all the imperialist states is either control over, or at least a favorable position in the world production networks and the global commodity chain. The struggle for dominance and even survival leads inevitably to bitter struggles over access to critical resources, including labor and world markets. The United States is the chief protagonist in this world struggle. What imparts to its actions, and especially ruthless and violent character, is the fact that the American ruling class's struggle for global hegemony is taking place within the context of the protracted decline of its real economic power. The halcyon days of American productive power, when its industries dominated the world, when the authority of the dollar was backed by gold and based on its real massive industrial base, authenticated by foreign trade surpluses, are long gone. Over the past half-century, the real foundation of the American economy has been transformed from industrial production to financial parasitism. The wealth of the American ruling class has been based not on the growth of production, but on the limitless expansion of debt. American capitalism now consists of a vast edifice of fictitious capital, legal claims to future income streams arising from loans and infinite forms of debt creation. Gross U.S. federal debt stood at $371 billion in 1970. It rose to $908 billion in 1980. By 2020, it had risen to $26 trillion, and by the beginning of this year, it had risen yet another $10 trillion. The scale of parasitism is almost beyond comprehension. The fictional character of wealth is exemplified by the fact that only about 15% of the funds circulating through U.S. financial institution finances new business investment. The remaining 85% chases existing assets. Thus, the price of equities bought and sold on Wall Street and global financial markets bear little and even no relationship whatsoever to the generation of surplus value in a real production process involving the expenditure of labor power. A study of international finance published in 2021 by the McKinsey Global Institute reported, and I quote, "From 2000 to 2020, financial assets such as equities, bonds, and derivatives grew from 8.5 to 12 times GDP. As asset prices rose, almost $2 in debt and about $4 in total liabilities, including debt, was created for every $1 in net new investment." End of quote. In recent months, there has been a great deal of material written about the growing crisis of confidence in the U.S. dollar, which has led to several sharp sell-offs on Wall Street and the rise of the price of gold to a record $3,500 an ounce. This is 100 times more than the official price of gold in August 1971, when President Richard Nixon ended the convertibility of the dollar into gold at the rate of $35 per ounce. The objective significance of the loss of confidence is that the unsustainable character of the United States' massive trade deficits and related mountain of debt is now recognized by global investors. Stated bluntly, it is feared that the United States is approaching bankruptcy. Herein lies the key to understanding the policies of the Trump administration. However crazed and reckless his policies may appear, they are all, in the final analysis, desperate responses to a real crisis of American imperialism. Lacking any humane response to problems that are insoluble on the basis of capitalism, the actions taken by Trump only deepen the crisis and make matters worse. Multi-trillion-dollar trade deficits will be slashed by imposing tariffs. Massive budget deficits will be cut by a savage assault on critical social programs. Incapable of creating wealth through production, Trump is openly planning to plunder the resources of other countries. And perhaps the only truthful statement that Trump has made since taking office, he bluntly stated that the fate of Ukraine is of interest to the United States only as a source of trillions of dollars worth of strategic minerals. Emulating Hitler's annexation of Austria and Czechoslovakia in 1938, Trump is threatening to seize Canada and Greenland. He has declared his intention to reestablish American control over the Panama Canal. There is a distinct similarity between Hitler and Trump in their objective motivations and decision-making processes. The late British historian Tim Mason described Hitler's government as, and I quote, a regime whose leadership was increasingly entrapped in economic and political contradictions largely of its own making, and that sought escape or resolution or maintenance of its distinctive identity through a series of sudden lurches in policy and ever more explosive risk-taking. End of quote. With the proviso that the underlying crisis has been developing in the United States over decades, the historian's description of Hitler's policymaking applies as well to the current American president. Trump's policies, when examined not as the mental spasms of an evil imbecile, but as the response of the American ruling class to a crisis for which there exists no progressive or peaceful answer, vindicates Trotsky's insight into the reactionary and violent essence of the United States' will to power. Trotsky wrote in 1928, and I quote, "In a period of crisis, the hegemony of the United States will operate more completely, more openly, and more ruthlessly than in the period of boom. The United States will seek to overcome and extricate herself from her difficulties and maladies, primarily at the expense of Europe, regardless of whether this occurs in Asia, Canada, South America, Australia, or Europe itself, or whether this takes place peacefully or through war." End of quote. 6 years later, in 1934, he made yet another chilling prediction. He wrote, "The world is divided. It must be redivided. For Germany, it was a question of organizing Europe. The United States must organize the world. History is bringing humanity face to face with the volcanic eruption of American imperialism." That eruption is now underway. But the preparation for global war requires the escalation of war at home. Since the start of his second term, Trump has been using the office of the presidency as the cockpit of a military police state dictatorship. He makes no pretense of his contempt for the Constitution and legal conventions. Trump's repeated use of executive orders rather than seeking congressional approval is intended as a demonstration of his unlimited powers. An executive order signed by Trump and issued on April 28th authorizes the use of military and police power without legal restraints. Section 4 of the order is titled Using National Security Assets for Law and Order. It declares, within 90 days of the date of this order, the Attorney General and the Secretary of Defense, in consultation with the Secretary of Homeland Security and the heads of agencies as appropriate, shall increase the provision of excess military and national security assets in local jurisdictions to assist state and local law enforcement. The section then states, the Secretary of Defense, in coordination with the Attorney General, shall determine how military and national security assets, training, non-lethal capabilities, and personnel can most effectively be used to prevent crime. This order, without precedent in American history, abolishes, under the transparently fraudulent guise of fighting crime, the Bill of Rights. Underscoring the dictatorial character of this executive order, Section 6 declares, the Attorney General and Secretary of Homeland Security task forces, formed in accordance with Executive Order 14159 of January 20th, 2025, protecting the American people against invasion, is to coordinate and advance the objectives of this order. As in his international policies, Trump is acting not merely on the basis of his individual whims, but as the representative of the oligarchy that rules the United States. The Trump administration is not an aberration. It is rather the political expression of the incompatibility of massive social inequality with democracy. Choosing Elon Musk as his principal advisor, the world's richest man, and staffing his cabinet with mega millionaires and billionaires, Trump hardly bothers to conceal the fact that his is a government of, by, and for the oligarchy. But Trump did not create the oligarchy. It is the product of the process of financialization and the accumulation of fictitious capital. The economically pathological focus on increasing shareholder value, that is, the income stream of the oligarchs, legitimizes an inherently corrupt system in which profits are generated not from productive activity, but from the manipulation of financial assets, exemplified by stock buybacks, mergers, and leveraged acquisitions. In absolute terms, even when adjusted for inflation, the personal wealth of the multi-billionaire oligarchs surpasses that of the robber barons of the late 19th century and the early 20th century. The scale of wealth concentrated in an infinitesimal section of the population all but defies comprehension. A recently published analysis of wealth distribution in the United States reported that in 2024 alone, $1 trillion in additional wealth was generated for the 19 richest American households. This 0.00001% of the population accounts for almost 2% of total U.S. household wealth. The process of social polarization is growing like a malignant tumor. In 2021, there were 1,370 billionaires. By the end of 2024, the number had risen to 1,990, an increase of 45%. The richest 1% owns 31% of the wealth of the United States. Collectively, the wealthiest 10% owns 67% of the national wealth. By way of comparison, the bottom 50% owns just 3%. This staggering level of social inequality cannot be sustained democratically. It must be emphasized that the oligarchs depend upon the continuous supply and injection of credit into the financial markets, especially in situations as in 2008 and 2020, when the entire fraudulent system is confronted with the danger of collapse. This process was exemplified by the response of the Federal Reserve and central banks to the COVID-19 pandemic. The principal concern of governments was not saving lives, but rather saving the financial markets and their ruling class investors. As my comrade Nick Beams, who will be delivering greetings to this rally, has explained, and I quote, "The wealth of the financial oligarchy is underpinned not by the creation of value through production, but by the continuous injection of fictitious capital into financial markets by the state," unquote. In objective terms, the Trump administration's assault on democracy signifies the violent realignment of political forms of rule in accordance with the class relations that exist in society. The White House floats atop a smelly dung heap of fraud. Trump, the crude huckster and maestro of swindle, is nothing but the personification of a criminal oligarchy. But the American experience is not entirely unique. It is the most pronounced manifestation of the wave of political and social counter-revolution that is sweeping across all the major capitalist countries. 80 years after the corpse of Mussolini was hung from his heels in Milano, and Hitler ended his life by firing a bullet into his mouth, fascist parties and politicians are gaining strength in virtually all the advanced countries. This dangerous fact must be confronted. Any softening of reality accompanied by a reassuring self-deception that the danger will somehow pass and all will return to normal serves only to clear the path for political catastrophe. But acknowledging the fascist danger and the threat of world war does not mean accepting either as the inevitable outcome of the crisis of world capitalism. A very different outcome is possible. One should not underestimate the danger of fascism, but nor should one exaggerate it. Trump, in his intentions and his personality, is a fascist. But he does not yet command, as Hitler did, a mass fascist movement. History teaches that the development and victory of such a mass reactionary movement depends upon the demoralization of the working class. But that is not the situation that prevails today. It is true that during the first 5 years of this decade, capitalist politics has acquired a ferociously reactionary character. But alongside the growth of capitalist imperialist reaction, another countervailing process is underway, that of the growing social and political radicalization of the working class. This movement is strengthening on a world scale. The same economic, social, and political contradictions that drive the ruling elites toward fascism and war provide the impulse for the intensification of class struggle and social revolution. Remember, the outbreak of World War I in August 1914 was followed in February 1917 by the eruption of the Russian Revolution, which led to the conquest of power by the Bolsheviks in October 1917 and the establishment of the world's first worker state. The Second World War unleashed the floodgates of mass revolutionary struggles by the working class and colonial masses that spread across the globe. The same historical dialectic is at work today. The global crisis, developing on the basis of an obsolete capitalist system, allows for two potential resolutions: either the end of human society as a consequence of fascism and war, or its renewal through socialist revolution. Notwithstanding all the dangers that presently exist, and without underestimating the immense destructive resources and capabilities of the ruling class, the potential for social revolution is greater today than at any time in history. The power of the working class, in an objective sense, is at its apogee. The disintegration of the nation-state system has drastically eroded the historical foundation of capitalist rule. But the globalization of production has vastly expanded the physical size and potential economic power of the international working class. In just the last 30 years, the global proletariat has grown by more than 1 billion people. The size of the proletariat has surged in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. In the advanced countries, the process of proletarianization has absorbed occupations that were previously defined as petit bourgeois middle class. Over 60% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, including many informally middle-class occupations. Even higher paid workers now derive virtually all income from wages. In the 1930s, President Franklin Roosevelt remarked cynically that he would prevent revolution by making the United States a nation of homeowners. But during the past 40 years, working-class home ownership has declined precipitously, from 65% to 35%. The once fabled land of unlimited opportunity has become the land of unpayable debt. U.S. household debt now stands at $17.5 trillion, of which mortgages account for $12.4 trillion, car loans for $1.6 trillion, credit card debt for $1.1 trillion, and personal loans $600 billion. As for students just starting out in life, they carry a debt burden of $1.7 trillion. On average, 43 million present or former students owe $37,000. Many graduate students owe much more. But these statistics, however significant as indicators of social distress, are not by themselves the decisive propellant of socialist revolution. The process of globalization, ruinous for the nation-state system, unifies the working class. The global commodity chains can be transformed into global networks for consciously directed revolutionary action. Moreover, we are presently living amid one of the greatest scientific revolutions in history. The advances in communication, a byproduct of this revolution, has placed at the disposal of the working class extraordinary means for planning, organizing, and directing its struggles on a global scale. Yet another powerful weapon is now available for utilization by the working class. The development of the artificial intelligence technologies make possible an exponential increase in the ability of the working class to access information and knowledge. Of course, the ruling elite seek to use these technologies in the interest of the profit system. But AI opens up hitherto unimaginable possibilities for the education and political enlightenment of the masses. The appeal to workers in the historic anthem of the socialist movement, the Internationale, away with all your superstitions, has acquired a powerful means for its realization. When he observed the first detonation of an atomic bomb in July 1945, the physicist Robert Oppenheimer recalled a passage from Hindu scripture, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." With the development of AI, which can be more aptly characterized as exponentially expanded human intelligence, technology, to the extent that it penetrates and influences the political practice of the masses, becomes an ally of the working class in the destruction of capitalism. But technology by itself cannot bring about the socialist revolution. For the working class to impose its socialist solution to the crisis of world capitalism, it must solve the crisis of revolutionary leadership. It must break free from the control of pro-capitalist political parties and trade union bureaucracies that do everything in their power to suppress the class struggle. Above all, the working class must repudiate all varieties of reactionary nationalism. The call for the unity of the international working class is not a utopian pipe dream. It is the essential and only realistic foundation of revolutionary strategy in the modern world. 50 years ago this month, the Vietnamese workers and peasants celebrated May Day 1975 by entering Saigon and overthrowing the puppet government of the United States. It was a massive defeat for American imperialism. But the revolution was isolated by nationalist policies of the Stalinist bureaucracies in Moscow and Beijing. And despite all the sacrifices of 30 years of struggle, the national isolation led to the restoration of capitalism and the degradation of Vietnam into a source of cheap labor. This historical experience is yet another demonstration that there are for the working class no national solutions to the global contradictions of imperialism. The claim that a multipolar alliance of national states represents an alternative to the hegemony of U.S. imperialism is a delusion. What is required is not a new strategic alliance of national states arrayed against the U.S. and Western Europe, but the abolition of the nation-state system and capitalist ownership of the means of production. We have entered a period of the greatest revolutionary struggles in world history, upon which the fate of humanity depends. There is no point wasting time speculating as to whether the working class is revolutionary or whether socialism is possible. Marx wrote in his thesis of Feuerbach that debates over the reality or non-reality of thinking, apart from practice, are meaningless. Debates over the possibility of stopping war, defeating fascism, and establishing socialism, separated from participation in the class struggle, are utterly useless. The attainability of socialism will be shown in practice. The history of the last century demonstrated the possibility of socialist revolution, but it also proved that victory depends upon the building of a Marxist, Trotskyist leadership in the working class. The International Committee of the Fourth International and its affiliated Socialist Equality Parties are dedicated to the fulfillment of this task. On this critical May Day, we call upon all those who are participating in this worldwide rally to join our World Party and fight for the victory of socialism.
What do you think about building a movement of the working class?
I think it's past time to do that because our labor is what's making everything move forward.
Because I'm tired of the ruling class deciding my taxes can be used to fund their wars.
Trump just wants to roll over Gaza and just completely obliterate it. You know, now they're saying they don't have to do any due process to take anybody who's a lawful citizen out of the country.
They are literally grabbing people off of the streets and sending them to death camps in foreign countries. This has not happened before in the United States.
It's a lot like what happened to Germany in the late 30s.
If you read about the rise of fascism in Germany, it's like literally step by step all of the same stuff is happening, and that ended with the genocide of millions of people.
The first thing they did was deport the others.
At first they go after the pro-Palestine protesters, but if they can go after them, they can go after anybody. None of us are safe.
They want to potentially jail us for speech, and they're doing that at the same time as they are openly defying the Supreme Court and pushing on our Fourth Amendment rights.
The rules are all being written by the billionaires, and they're writing those rules for their advantage, and they're screwing common working class people all around the country.
Healthcare, education, food and water, shelter should not be for profit.
I don't think the billionaires should even exist. I don't think it should be possible.
There's more of us than there are CEOs and oligarchs.
There's millions of Americans that recognize the reality that this system doesn't work for average people.
People got to be out here until that man is out of office, or maybe even the whole system goes down with it.
We need to come together. We need to join ranks with workers, not just from the U.S., from Canada, everywhere, because it affects everyone.
Our struggle is a global struggle.
We're stronger together, and our labor has fueled this world.
There needs to be a party that is for the working class, for most of people in America, right?
This rally is being held amidst an extraordinary intensification of the world crisis of capitalism, as the ruling classes turn to fascism, dictatorship, and war. Nowhere is this development more advanced than in the United States. 100 days into his second term, Donald Trump is seeking to transform the American presidency into an unchecked instrument of dictatorship. Trump embodies the criminality of American capitalism, the marriage of oligarchy and cultural degradation, the personification of the political underworld that now rules from the White House. In just the first 3 months of his administration, Trump has defied court orders, deployed federal agents to illegally abduct immigrant students, arrested judges, waged a war against political dissent, and declared his intention to deport U.S. citizens to concentration camps abroad. Scenes associated with the most brutal dictatorships now unfold daily. Immigrants deported en masse under the Alien Enemies Act, including Kilmar Abrego Garcia, a Maryland resident torn from his family and imprisoned in El Salvador by mistake. Rumeysa Ozturk, a Tufts University student seized on the street by masked agents for writing an op-ed against the Gaza genocide. Momodou Tall at Cornell, forced to leave the country for challenging Trump's executive orders. And green card holder Mahmoud Khalil at Columbia, arrested without a warrant and facing deportation for his political views. A memo from Secretary of State Marco Rubio openly declared that Khalil should be removed from the country for his past, current, or expected beliefs. This is thought crime, first formulated by the Nazis and now embraced by the Trump White House. At the same time, the Trump administration is escalating the global wars of American imperialism. From the continuation of the genocide in Gaza, now in its final stages of ethnic cleansing, to preparations for war against Iran, China, and beyond. Trump's trade war, launched under the banner of Made in America, is the economic front for a much larger campaign for world domination. We are witnessing the violent realignment of the capitalist state to correspond to the oligarchic character of American society. Under the direction of Elon Musk, the world's richest man, the so-called Department of Government Efficiency is carrying out the mass firing of federal workers and the dismantling of entire agencies. Social programs, including Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, are being slashed. Science and public health are under relentless attack. Last year, the 19 richest households in the U.S. increased their wealth by $1 trillion to $2.6 trillion. $1 trillion is enough to give every worker in America a $7,000 raise. It could double the budget for the Department of Public Education. It could end homelessness overnight. Instead, the vast wealth is being funneled into war, deportation camps, the stock market, and the pockets of the rich. A new way forward is necessary. The fight against Trump can only be waged in opposition to the Democratic Party, which has enabled Trump every step of the way. The Biden administration and its right-wing agenda of war and reaction paved the way for Trump's reelection. Its principal focus was the escalation of war against Russia and Ukraine, while at home it presided over historic levels of inequality. It was Biden who armed and financed the Israeli regime's genocide in Gaza and the slaughter of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. It was Biden who began the mass repression of student protesters opposing the genocide. And it is the Democrats who have responded to Trump's assault on the Constitution, not with resistance, but with collaboration, welcoming Trump into the White House after his inauguration, pledging cooperation, and ensuring the uninterrupted funding for his regime. As for figures like Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, they talk of oligarchy, but not of capitalism. Their program consists of calls for campaign finance reform, as if the ruling class turning to dictatorship can be restrained by tinkering around the edges of a bankrupt social and economic system. Above all, they want to convince workers and young people to keep faith in the Democratic Party. It is impossible to fight oligarchy without breaking its power, and that means the expropriation of the billionaires, the seizure of their wealth, and the socialist reorganization of society in the interests of the working class. What is required is not moral appeals or political maneuvers within the state apparatus, but the mobilization of the working class in mass revolutionary struggle. And that struggle must be based on internationalism. Workers in the United States are part of the international working class, the most powerful social force on the planet. All over the world, the same conditions exist: mass poverty, war, dictatorship. And in every country, the ruling classes are trying to drag workers into conflict with one another. In the United States, this poisonous nationalism is being promoted by the trade union bureaucracy. This includes those who present themselves and are presented as reformers, like UAW President Shawn Fain, Biden's most ardent cheerleader, who is now openly backing Trump's tariffs and preparing to dragoon workers behind the war machine. Exactly 2 weeks ago, we marked the 250th anniversary of the battles of Lexington and Concord, which inaugurated the American Revolution and the struggle against the British monarchy. We also commemorated the 160th anniversary of the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, who led the Second American Revolution and carried through the abolition of slavery through the expropriation of the slaveholders. The great task of our time is to carry out the Third American Revolution, the Socialist Revolution, as part of a world revolution, to overthrow the dictatorship of the financial oligarchy, abolish capitalism, and establish a workers' government based on social equality and democratic control of economic life. To carry this forward, the working class needs its own party, armed with a program, a strategy, and the lessons of history. That party is the Socialist Equality Party, which is part of the International Committee of the Fourth International, the World Trotskyist movement. Join the Socialist Equality Party. Take up the fight for socialism, for equality, and for the future.
Im Namen der Sozialistischen Gleichheitspartei überbringe ich euch revolutionäre Grüße zum 1. Mai aus Berlin. Aus der Stadt, die vor genau 80 Jahren im Mai 1945 von der Roten Armee befreit wurde. Hier am sowjetischen Ehrenmal in der Schönholzer Heide im Nordosten Berlins liegen über 13.000 sowjetische Soldaten begraben. Sie haben im heldenhaften Kampf gegen die Faschisten ihr Leben gegeben. Auch den sowjetischen Kriegsgefangenen wird hier gedacht. Dieser Ort gilt als größter sowjetischer Friedhof außerhalb Russlands. Über 27 Millionen Sowjetbürger und 6 Millionen Juden sind dem Holocaust und dem Vernichtungskrieg der Nazis zum Opfer gefallen. Das sind keine toten Zahlen der fernen Vergangenheit. 80 Jahre später erleben wir die Rückkehr des deutschen Imperialismus zu seiner räuberischen Expansionspolitik. Ihr Hunger nach Rohstoffen, Arbeitskräften, Einflusssphären treibt die deutschen Eliten zum 3. Mal in einen Krieg gegen Russland. Sie nutzen den reaktionären Einmarsch des Putin-Regimes in der Ukraine, um die größte Aufrüstung seit Hitler zu rechtfertigen. Der Bundestag und der Bundesrat haben über 1 Billion Euro an Kriegskrediten bewilligt. Der designierte Bundeskanzler Friedrich Merz will die Ukraine mit deutschen Taurus-Marschflugkörpern beliefern, die Moskau erreichen können. Das ist brandgefährlich. Wer kann garantieren, dass der Kreml auf die Taurus-Waffe nicht mit Angriffen auf deutsche Ziele antwortet? Seit dem Amtsantritt des Faschisten Trump verfolgt Deutschland noch aggressiver seine Kriegsagenda. Notfalls ohne oder sogar gegen die USA. Auf Trumps America First antwortet die Bundesregierung mit Deutschland über alles. Hinter dem Rüstungswahn steht der Revanchismus der deutschen herrschenden Klasse. Sie will endlich die Fesseln der Nachkriegsperiode abstreifen und wieder nach der Weltmacht greifen. Ihre geopolitischen Interessen verschleiert sie hinter der Lüge, man würde die Demokratie gegen den russischen Aggressor verteidigen. An der ideologischen Front wird die Geschichte umgeschrieben, um den deutschen Imperialismus von seinen Verbrechen reinzuwaschen. Deutsche Akademiker relativieren den Vernichtungskrieg und den Holocaust der Nazis und versuchen, die Sowjetunion als eigentlichen Aggressor und Täter des Zweiten Weltkriegs darzustellen. Jetzt hat der Bundestag sogar die Botschafter von Russland und Belarus von der diesjährigen Gedenkfeier zum Kriegsende ausgeschlossen. Dieser Affront richtet sich gegen die gesamte Arbeiterklasse. Denn es gibt kaum eine Familie in Russland und Belarus, die nicht Verwandte durch den Terror der Nazis oder im Kampf gegen sie verloren hat. Tag aus, Tag ein trommeln deutsche Politiker und Journalisten dafür, die Gesellschaft wieder kriegstüchtig zu machen. Die künftige Regierung der Christdemokraten CDU und der Sozialdemokraten SPD plant die Wiedereinführung der Wehrpflicht, die Militarisierung der Universitäten und Schulen, den Aufbau einer massiven Rüstungsindustrie, die Umstellung auf Kriegswirtschaft, Sozialabbau und weitere Angriffe auf Geflüchtete. Alle kapitalistischen Parteien unterstützen die Kriegspolitik. Die ehemaligen Pazifisten und Grünen sind heute die aggressivsten Kriegstreiber. Auch die Linkspartei, die 25% der jungen Wähler gewann, weil sie sich als Gegnerin des Rechtsrucks darstellte, hat der Aufrüstung zugestimmt. Die Kriegskosten sollen den Arbeitern aufgebürdet werden. Über Kürzungen in Bildung, Gesundheit und Soziales, Massenentlassungen und steigende Preise und Mieten. Doch dagegen regt sich bereits Widerstand. In Form von Streiks, Demonstrationen gegen die rechtsextreme Alternative für Deutschland, AfD, oder Proteste gegen den Völkermord in Gaza. Während die Regierung den Genozid unterstützt, lässt sie Kriegsgegner und friedlich protestierende Studierende von der Polizei niederknüppeln, festnehmen und abschieben. Wie in den 1930er Jahren reagiert die herrschende Klasse auf die tiefe Krise des Kapitalismus und ihre Angst vor einer sozialen Revolution, indem sie die Faschisten der AfD fördert, die jetzt in den Umfragen stärkste Kraft sind. Schon 1933 brachten die politischen Eliten und das Großkapital Hitler an die Macht, um die starke Arbeiterbewegung niederzuschlagen. Das war nur möglich, weil die stalinistische Politik der Kommunistischen Partei Deutschlands, KPD, die Arbeiter gespalten und gelähmt hatte. Im Nationalsozialismus zeigte sich der Kapitalismus in seiner nackten und brutalsten Form. Hier, in diesem Gebiet nahe dem Denkmal, betrieben die Nazis ein Zwangsarbeiterlager, in dem über 2000 Menschen bis aufs Blut ausgebeutet wurden. Unter ihnen viele Sowjetbürger. Sie schufteten für die Deutsche Waffen- und Munitionsfabriken AG, die der Quandt-Familie gehörte. Heute eine der reichsten Unternehmerfamilien Deutschlands. Ihr gigantisches Vermögen von über 40 Milliarden Euro und dem Hauptanteil an BMW haben die Quandts auf den Knochen von bis zu 50.000 Zwangsarbeitern aufgebaut. Lange wurde über das braune Erbe der deutschen Kapitalisten geschwiegen. Jetzt berauschen sich Rüstungskonzerne wie Rheinmetall wieder an ihren Kriegsprofiten. Doch damals wie heute ist die Bourgeoisie in einer verzweifelten Lage. Ihr wahnsinniger Kriegskurs ist ein Ausdruck ihrer Schwäche. Sie verteidigt ein Gesellschaftssystem, das längst ausgedient hat. Sie fürchtet die brodelnde Opposition der Arbeiterklasse, dem Totengräber des Kapitalismus. Im Unterschied zu 1933 hat sie heute auch keine faschistische Massenbewegung. Die Arbeiter sind nicht geschlagen. Explosive Kämpfe stehen erst bevor. Die Antikriegsstimmung in der Arbeiterklasse ist enorm. 2 Weltkriege haben sich tief in ihr Gedächtnis eingebrannt. Die Jugend will nicht als Kanonenfutter verheizt werden. Die Mehrheit der unter 29-Jährigen lehnt die Wehrpflicht ab. 81% der jungen Menschen äußerten im letzten Jahr Angst vor einem Krieg in Europa. Die entscheidende Frage ist, wie kann der Abstieg in die Barbarei gestoppt werden? 1933 war nicht unvermeidlich. Es gab eine Perspektive, mit der Hitler hätte verhindert werden können. Die Vereinigung der Arbeiterbewegung unter einer revolutionären Führung und mit einem internationalistischen Programm. Dafür kämpfte der Revolutionär Leo Trotzky gegen die stalinistischen und sozialdemokratischen Führer der beiden Arbeiterparteien. An Trotzkis Kampf müssen wir heute anknüpfen. Krieg und Faschismus können gestoppt werden, wenn die große Kraft der internationalen Arbeiterklasse mobilisiert wird. Dafür braucht sie eine politische Führung, die die Lehren der Geschichte gezogen hat und eine sozialistische Strategie verfolgt. Diese Perspektive vertritt das Internationale Komitee der 4. Internationale, die Weltpartei der sozialistischen Revolution. Deshalb rufe ich euch auf. Es ist keine Zeit zu verlieren. Schließt euch unserer Bewegung an. Werdet aktiv in der Sozialistischen Gleichheitspartei und unserer Jugendorganisation, den IYCC.
В качестве вступления я бы хотел передать свои искренние приветствия и поздравления другим выступающим и слушателям, собравшимся в этот день. Мой товарищ Богдан Сиротюк был арестован за несколько дней до прошлогоднего митинга. Год спустя он все еще находится в руках СБУ, которая, совершая подлог, пытается изобразить его агентом путинского режима. На самом деле, преступление товарища Богдана заключалось в его последовательной защите марксистских принципов, по примеру Ленина и Троцкого. С его арестом борьба за независимую политику рабочего класса России и Украины против режима Зеленского и Путина на основе социалистического интернационализма была объявлена уголовным преступлением и государственной изменой. Настоящими преступниками являются режим Зеленского и его империалистические покровители, которые покрывают преступления украинского фашизма и реабилитируют нацистских преступников. Именно они посылают украинских рабочих на смерть во имя интересов западного империализма и олигархии. Однако политика путинского режима не менее реакционна. Она основана на утопической иллюзии о возможности заключения сделки с империализмом. Но любая сделка будет служить интересам олигархии и носить временный характер. Она ничем не поможет в отражении фундаментальной угрозы, стоящей перед рабочим классом всего бывшего Советского Союза. Своей политикой и пропагандой национализма путинский режим играет на руку империализму и готовит гигантскую катастрофу. В этом году первомайский митинг совпадает с 80-й годовщиной победы в войне против нацизма. Победа, которая используется путинским режимом, чтобы придать собственному реакционному вторжению в Украину видимость прогрессивной борьбы. Защита Советского Союза от фашизма досталась советскому народу огромной ценой. Только по официальным оценкам СССР потерял около 27 миллионов человек, из них 14 миллионов мирных жителей, 9 миллионов красноармейцев, погибших на передовой, 2 миллиона погибли в плену и в лагерях смерти, еще 2 миллиона умерли в тылу от голода и болезней. К этому необходимо прибавить огромное число психологических и физических потрясений, которые перенесли те, кто остался инвалидом, выжил в концлагерях, потерял родственников, любимых, друзей и товарищей. Все это не могло быть забыто. В советском кино, музыке, поэзии и живописи везде можно было найти отражение пути масс в их выдающейся героической борьбе. Сегодня Кремль стремится использовать глубоко укоренившуюся память о войне для продвижения национализма и внесения исторической путаницы. Основной задачей этой лавины пропаганды состоит в том, чтобы стереть политическое различие между Советским Союзом и Российской Федерацией. Однако, несмотря на географическое положение и поколение людей, живших в обоих государствах, СССР и Российская Федерация имеют совершенно разные классовые и исторические истоки. Советский Союз был основан в декабре 1922 года после победоносной гражданской войны, в которой рабочий класс во главе с большевиками отстоял завоевание Октябрьской революции. Экспроприировав буржуазию, установив национализированные отношения собственности и плановую экономику, большевики заложили серьезный социально-экономический фундамент для социалистического общества. Они сознательно связывали строительство социализма с победой мировой революции. Но эта интернациональная марксистская программа была предана сталинской бюрократией, провозгласившей реакционную политику социализма в одной стране для защиты собственных привилегий. Бюрократическое перерождение Советского Союза и большевистской партии завершилось расправой над поколениями революционеров в условиях большого террора. Тем не менее, простейший фундамент рабочего государства еще сохранялся. И несмотря на убийство наиболее выдающихся представителей марксизма, в массах все еще сохранялось стихийное сознание традиций Октябрьской революции. Именно эти традиции вырвались наружу во время войны против нацизма и обеспечили победу Советскому Союзу. Российская Федерация возникла в результате сталинистской контрреволюции против традиций и достижений Октябрьской революции. Начиная с 1985 года, перестройка Михаила Горбачева окончательно подорвала основы выродившегося рабочего государства. В 1991 году бюрократия ликвидировала Советский Союз. Из этой контрреволюции возникли олигархические режимы Ельцина, а затем Путина. Войной в Украине путинский режим на деле защищает не народ от империализма, а капиталистическую собственность российской олигархии. Лучший способ отдать дань уважения огромным жертвам советских людей в войне с нацизмом – сказать правду: Путин и российская олигархия являются врагами традиции войны с нацизмом. Они являются врагами интересов российского, украинского и международного рабочего класса. Сегодня единственным путем борьбы против империализма является борьба за самостоятельную мобилизацию российского рабочего класса вместе с украинским и международным рабочим классом под знаменем Октябрьской революции, против войны в Украине, за единство российского и украинского рабочего класса, против империализма и буржуазного национализма, за возрождение традиций Октябрьской революции, за освобождение Богдана Сиротюка, за строительство Международного комитета 4-го интернационала.
I work for Royal Mail. I've been doing that for 30 plus years. I've seen our conditions year on year getting worse and worse.
Well, I've been in the post office for about 24 years. They're very aggressive and they bully. You spend most of your day at work. So if I'm at work being stressed the entire day, that's going to have a tremendous impact when you go home. To your kids, to your wife, to your girlfriend, or maybe you're taking care of your elderly mother or parents, anything, whatever it is.
And I work as a nurse. We don't have enough people to work there. Some days I'm alone with all of the kids and they're struggling with mental health. I don't have the time to care for all of them. The money isn't equal to the work we are doing.
We went on strike for 6 months when the writers were on strike. There is so much uncertainty in our lives. We are always on payment plans to pay our taxes. We never catch up. There's just a feeling of constant failure and desperation.
Automation and AI are being introduced, cutting the number of workers that we have, leaving those workers that are left with even more work to do in a day. And it's unbearable. The big bosses reap all the profits of that.
The work there, when the floors move, and by the time you're done with work, it feels like you have vertigo. It feels like you're still swaying as you're standing up. Your hands come back swollen and you're hardly able to actually use them after work. And you still gotta wake up the next day just to keep going with that. We toil ourselves to the bones to make these things that we can hardly afford.
Cost of living is as high as it's ever been. As far as groceries, gas, everything is sky high.
I know in the US, for example, the price of food is going astronomically high. But in Germany, it's tending to be the same. We are workers, we make this world work, and we don't even get the basic cost of living.
Teachers are underpaid and they cannot afford housing in the district where they work. There are more teachers who have second jobs than teachers who don't. A lot of teachers are working past their contractual hours, not getting paid for that time. There's a lot of overcrowding in the schools. My building is 42 students per classroom with one teacher. It's a very difficult job. So I think rank and file committees are really important. I'm glad that I joined a rank and file committee. It's helped me to educate myself.
If our union is on board with the post office, they're in league. It's obvious at this point, and something has to be done about it. I look forward to collectively coming together with people in all industries to do something about this.
We offer below inflation pay rises, which the union have readily accepted. So when we go and complain and say, look, we've got too much to do, we're exhausted, the stock answer is, your union agreed to it. So who do you go to? The rank and file committee is genuinely interested in a different solution.
My name is Will Lehman. I'm an auto worker at Mack Trucks in Macungie, Pennsylvania, and I would like to extend revolutionary greetings from workers in America to all those attending this international rally. Workers in the U.S. face hard truths. Wealth inequality is at all-time highs. The cost of living has soared out of control. Exploitation in factories, warehouses, hospitals, schools, docks, and postal and packaging centers has only increased in recent years. This is a process that has been occurring for decades under both Democratic and Republican administrations. After falling support for the Democrats, the would-be Führer Trump is now again in the White House. Polls indicate that hopes that some had that Trump would change the economic situation have faded considerably. Trump's trade war has only worsened the economic outlook for workers in the U.S. United Auto Workers President Shawn Fain has spent months cozying up to Trump and endorsing his nationalist tariffs. It is nothing new for a union leader in the U.S. to promote the dead end of nationalism. For decades, the unions have pushed it without saving a single job. Nationalism is a poison for workers. It has only led to the destruction of jobs, divisions among workers, and deeper exploitation in the race to the bottom. Nationalism pits worker against worker, distracting from the real class war, the war of the corporate oligarchy against the working class. For years, union bureaucrats throughout the world have told workers we must accept less to stay competitive, using fear to protect their own privileged positions as corporate lapdogs. They betray the working class with every single sellout contract they enforce, every concession they demand, and every time they pit us against workers in other countries. The tariffs will only drive workers further into poverty internationally, as we are forced to pay for them. They have already resulted in layoffs in the U.S. auto industry, including at my plant and other Mack Trucks factories and suppliers, with over 2,000 workers losing their jobs. They will lead to increased layoffs internationally as the price of cars increase and the resulting lack of demand decreases production. Most importantly, history shows that trade war leads to shooting war. The real aim of the tariffs is to bring enough military manufacturing in the U.S. to carry out world war, particularly targeting China. This did not begin with Trump, but was already taking place under Biden. Workers at my own plant should recall Biden's visit in 2021 when he declared that we're in a race with China. He spoke of the need for American manufactured chipsets as part of his infrastructure plan. They intend to use these chipsets in military production for war against China, not for the betterment of workers in the U.S. The Democrats and Republicans seek to divide us and force us to compete with our class allies in the immensely powerful Chinese working class, with whom we share the same class interests. Just like workers in the U.S., Chinese workers have demonstrated an immense desire to fight in recent strikes. If we are to win in the struggles ahead, we cannot be divided from our coworkers in or from any country, but instead need to build bonds of unity that transcend national borders. Furthermore, war with China would lead to a brutal, bloody disaster for the working class forced to fight it. More than 80 million died as a result of World War II. A third world war with all the major powers possessing nuclear bombs would lead to the destruction of humanity. The same ruling class that promotes nationalism is assaulting immigrant workers and students in the U.S. These attacks are aimed at eroding democratic rights won through past revolutionary struggles. The U.S. is a nation of immigrants, with most tracing their roots abroad. The ruling class scapegoats immigrants for economic hardship to divide workers and clear the way for broader attacks, including against native-born workers, who Trump now calls homegrowns and threatens to send to concentration camps in El Salvador. American workers must reconnect with our traditions of seeing an attack against one as an attack against all. We must fight for our immigrant brothers and sisters, and we must recognize that the struggle ahead cannot be won by allowing attacks against our democratic rights, regardless of where anyone was born. We must be guided by the history of revolution in the U.S. When the Founding Fathers recognized that things could not continue in the old way under feudal monarchy, they launched a revolution that sparked revolutions around the world. 7 years later, as Lincoln put it, a second revolution, the Civil War, took place, leading to the abolition of slavery. Now, a majority of American workers recognize that we cannot continue to live in the old way. Evidence of this can be found in the recent years' strike votes in the high 90% range. In February, workers at Rolls-Royce in Indiana voted by 99.5% to strike. There was not one worker in 100 among them that was against the fight. But we need more than the will to fight, more than the recognition that things cannot continue the way they are. What we need is a political perspective based on our class interests. Those with that political perspective need to step forward to lead this fight through the building of the International Workers' Alliance of rank-and-file committees. Appeals to the existing organs of power have proven to be worthless. We need a movement that we control and that progresses the fight for our class interests, against capitalist exploitation, against nationalist divisions, and against war. We will find agreement among our coworkers for the necessity of this fight, but we have to lead it. We risk the future of humanity if we fail to act, and we have everything to gain by the struggles we must lead. Join the International Workers' Alliance of rank-and-file committees and help lead this fight. Thank you.
Comrades and friends, on this May Day, the attention of the international working class must be focused on the historic implications of the tariff war. On April 2, so-called Liberation Day, US President Trump launched his economic war against the rest of the world. Tariffs against China, the main target, were lifted to 145%. This amounts to an economic blockade, ending all trade between the world's number 1 and number 2 economies. In essence, it is an act of war. So-called reciprocal tariffs, as high as almost 50%, were imposed on a range of countries. Those in Southeast Asia with close economic ties to China were a particular target. A 10% tariff was imposed on the remaining countries. There is now a 90-day pause on the reciprocal tariffs, supposedly to allow negotiations to take place. The International Trading Order, set up after World War II, based on lowering tariffs and other restrictions, has been turned on its head. Nothing like the Trump tariff measures has ever been enacted before. They outstrip, by far, even the infamous Smoot-Hawley tariffs imposed by the US in the 1930s. Those tariffs, based on virulent nationalism, were economic madness. They ultimately produced economic depression, social devastation, and World War II. Today's Trump tariffs, raising economic absurdity to new heights, bring an even greater danger of global conflagration. Every commodity today, from the simplest to the most advanced, is the outcome of a complex international division of labour. No commodity is made in America or for that matter, in any other country. An American SUV, for example, so stamped, has as many as 1,500 parts and components manufactured internationally. Every final product sold anywhere in the world results from a global supply chain. But Trump's tariff policy, mad as it is, has a logic to it. It aims to reshape US industries vital to gearing the national economy for war. In the executive order on reciprocal tariffs, Trump declared the US trade deficit had hollowed out its industrial base and made our nation dependent on other countries to meet our key security needs. In a very real sense, a global military war by the US is already underway against Russia in Ukraine, the enabling of Israel's genocide against the Palestinians in Gaza, with the continued threats against Iran. However, China is the central target as the US seeks to retain its position as the global hegemon. The spectacular growth of China from a backward country 40 years ago to the world's number 2 economy today constitutes an existential threat to US dominance. All sections of the US political and military establishment agree it must be crushed. Under conditions where economic measures cannot bring this about, war looms ever larger as the only viable option. The Trump tariff war and the consequent market gyrations have brought to the surface a long developing crisis in the finances of the US imperialist state. Its financial structure is shot through with debt and parasitism. This is expressed in the mountain of government debt, accumulated not least by the continued bailout of corporations and banks, along with increased military spending. It is now at $36 trillion and rising, with an annual interest bill of $1 trillion. Any other country in this position would have been declared bankrupt. But the US has continued because of the dollar's supremacy. Now this is being called into question. Previous periods of financial turbulence have seen a turn to US financial assets as a safe haven. Today, the dollar is sliding, and the universal call in financial markets is sell America. This is a crisis of the entire global capitalist system. It's not the creation of Trump. He is only the personification of its death agony. Workers have no interest in shoring up their own national capitalist class. They will impose on the working class the payment in kind to offset the impact of the tariff. The interests of workers are to unite with their class brothers in China and globally. The task before the working class, posed more acutely than ever before, is to put an end to capitalism in the fight for the only viable program, that of World Socialist Revolution. Thank you.
In just the last 2 months, there have been mass demonstrations against dictatorship, inequality, and war in the US, Turkey, Greece, Serbia, the UK, South Korea, Germany, Mozambique, Romania, Hungary, and Spain. Behind the millions around the planet who have taken to the streets stand millions more. The working class has the power to transform the world, but it needs a political program and a political party to lead it. The bourgeoisie has its newspapers and parties. The working class has its own, the World Socialist Web Site and the Socialist Equality Party. Everything that we do, every intervention we make costs money. We are funded by those who work, not those who live off the labor of others. Wall Street, big business, the rich, the trade union bureaucrats, the professional liars in Washington, the moneyed identity politics salesmen who try to sow hate among workers. All of them oppose the WSWS and want us to fail. We will not. We speak on behalf of the workers of the world, and it is from you and only you that we win support. Our struggle is your struggle, and it needs your backing. Now is the time to join the fight. not tomorrow and not the day after. Make clear which side you are on. Support the WSWS. Establish a monthly donation to help sustain our work. Go to wsws.org/donate and give generously today.
In Gaza sehen wir jeden Tag den Abstieg des Kapitalismus in die Barbarei.
People are allowed to question why bombs are killing small children.
I feel very strongly that bombing schools, bombing hospitals, bombing healthcare workers, like where's the red lines? All the red lines have been crossed.
At the moment when our government, when Germany, when America is lined up colluding with a genocide, the only thing that will stop it is if people feel bold enough to speak out against it. And at the moment I'm watching the news and I'm seeing that the quality of water isn't what it should be, and there's a genocide unfolding.
As Jewish people, it is our responsibility to stand here in anti-Zionist protest against the terrorist state of Israel, as well as these policies by the German state, which are rapidly descending into authoritarianism.
I'm the son of two Holocaust survivors who survived Auschwitz, and they would really die again if they saw what is now done in their name. We are all fighting against this genocide, and will fight until the end of Zionism. And we are not allowing them to speak in our name.
Free, free, free Palestine! Free, free, free Palestine! Stop the genocide! Stop the genocide!
Not half-hearted reformism, national populism, pacifism, the politics of protest and polite appeals to capitalist governments, but the class struggle pursued right through to the end. We have to rebuild that movement by turning to the international working class, the only social force that can provide a basis for a defense of democratic rights, of intellectual and cultural freedom, and which can oppose war, imperialist oppression, and attacks on the jobs, wages, and public services at home. Defending the Berlin Four, the SOAS II, all the political prisoners in the United States and around the world. Defending our future depends on this political perspective.
We are pitching our hopes on the new generation, on the students in encampments, on people all over the country and all over the world who have no inclination and no investment in the crimes of capitalism, or in war, or in destroying the planet.
Hi, my name is Feroz Sidwa. I wish I could join you all in person, but unfortunately had prior commitments. But I'm really glad to be here. May Day is really an important one to keep in mind with the continued assault on really the entire planet that's going on. I'm a trauma surgeon in California, and I've worked in the Gaza Strip and in Ukraine and elsewhere recently. Gaza especially reveals exactly the kind of world that we're headed towards if major world trends are not reversed. The global right-wing movement has been given a huge shot in the arm by the Trump administration, and it will continue to push and do what it's doing. And it's really up to us to push back. But that's a political decision. And to make political decisions, we need political power to be in the hands of people and institutions that don't have this psychotic disregard for human life that we're seeing from the US, from Israel, other places. So I hope you'll all continue working towards such a goal. And I hope I can join you in person next time. Thanks.
Workers and youth all over the world have watched in horror and mounting anger the greatest crime of the 21st century, Israel's slaughter of the defenseless Palestinians in Gaza. Israel has dropped 70,000 tons of explosives, equivalent to 6 Hiroshimas, killing at least 51,000 people. 70% of verified deaths have been women and children. This figure excludes the tens of thousands buried under the rubble or who never made it to hospital. For every direct death, researchers estimate there may be between 3 and 15 indirect deaths due to illness, disease, and lack of medical treatment, drugs, food, and clean water. All told, the real figure is likely to be more than 200,000. More than 1.9 million people, 90% of the population, have been internally displaced. Public and social infrastructure lie in ruins. This mass slaughter is deliberate policy. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu invoked the biblical story of the destruction of the Amalekites. Former Defense Minister Gallant referred to the Palestinians as human animals. Defense Minister Katz imposed a complete blockade on Gaza, promising to deliver only destruction. Israel has set up a government agency for the ethnic cleansing of Gaza, with Trump's plan as its blueprint. Netanyahu has the backing of all the imperialist powers. The United States, first under Biden and now under Trump, has taken the lead as part of their plans to secure control of the resource-rich Middle East, plans which now threaten all-out war with Iran. They will tolerate no opposition to their crimes. Lying charges of anti-Semitism are used to brutally suppress protests against genocide and silence dissenting voices. Israel's Zionist regime is not imperialism's only ally in the Middle East. The Arab states have not lifted a finger to help the Palestinians as they work with Washington to police their own populations, extend trade with Israel, and, in the case of Egypt and Jordan, act as its border police. Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas spoke for them all when he blamed Hamas for the slaughter, denouncing them as sons of bitches for not capitulating to the demands of Trump and Netanyahu. Israel's government of racists and fascists, committed to an expansionist Israel and apartheid rule, is not an aberration, as Netanyahu's democratic critics within Israel declare. These critics, too, back the assault on Gaza. It's the culmination of Israel's decades-long suppression of the Palestinians and repeated wars against its neighbours. Gaza stands as a searing indictment of the entire Zionist project. The foundation of the State of Israel was portrayed as the answer to the Nazi persecution of the Jews that ended in the Holocaust. It would supposedly provide them with a safe haven. But it was realized in the form of a capitalist state that dispossessed another people and was maintained through war and repression. Israel developed into a society torn by deep social inequality and divisions, dominated by far-right settlers and religious fundamentalists, with Arabs as second-class citizens. The Jewish people, long associated with progressive movements, above all the international socialist movement, are now implicated in the brutal oppression of an entire people. The Israeli state does not represent the interests of the Jewish working class, let alone world Jewry. It is the political instrument of a corrupt clique of billionaire gangsters who rule a military garrison policing the region on Washington's behalf. Millions have marched and rallied in defense of the Palestinians. But this cannot succeed through moral appeals to any imperialist power or capitalist government. There must be a turn to the working class and to the methods and politics of class struggle. These past weeks, Moroccan dock workers have boycotted ships supplying Israel, in the latest example of such class-based action. Dockers and airport ground crew in Greece, Belgium, Spain and India have mounted similar boycotts. In Israel, Tel Aviv has seen protests of thousands holding up pictures of hostages and murdered Gazan children, echoing the call heard on Holocaust Memorial Day. Never again means never again for anyone. The conditions exist to end national divisions between workers and develop a mass socialist movement against genocide and war. But this means breaking with the rotten social democratic, Stalinist and nationalist parties. It means ending the trade union bureaucracy's stranglehold over the working class. But above all, it means building a new leadership that takes as its own rallying call Karl Marx's famous dictum, "Workers of the world, unite."
Türkiye'deki Sosyalist Eşitlik Grubu adına dünyanın dört bir yanındaki işçilerin ve gençlerin uluslararası birlik, dayanışma ve mücadele günü olan 1 Mayıs'ı kutluyor ve devrimci selamlarımızı iletiyorum. Bu 1 Mayıs'ı Cumhurbaşkanı Recep Tayyip Erdoğan hükümetinin başkanlık diktatörlüğü inşasının yeni bir aşamaya geçtiği koşullarda kutluyoruz. 1 Mayıs öncesi İstanbul'da 90'dan fazla kişi evleri basılarak gözaltına alındı. Geçtiğimiz ay İstanbul'un Cumhuriyet Halk Partili Büyükşehir Belediye Başkanı Ekrem İmamoğlu tutuklanarak cezaevine gönderildi ve aralarında Kürt hareketinin liderlerinin de bulunduğu sayısız siyasi mahpusun arasına dahil oldu. En geç 2028'de yapılacak Cumhurbaşkanlığı seçimlerine yönelik anketlerde giderek artan oranda Erdoğan'ın önünde görünen İmamoğlu'nun hukuksuzca tutuklanması, ülke genelinde geniş gençlik ve emekçi kitlelerinin kendiliğinden protestolarına yol açtı. Bu kitlesel hareketin bağımsız ve devrimci bir işçi sınıfı hareketini tetikleme potansiyeli hem Erdoğan hükümetini hem de CHP dahil diğer kapitalist düzen partilerini dehşete düşürdü. Bu yüzden hükümet protestoları bastırmak için polis devleti baskısına başvururken CHP'de hareketi bir sonraki seçimlere yönlendirip sona erdirmek için elinden geleni yaptı. Hem temel demokratik hakların hiçe sayılması hem de işçi sınıfı ve gençlik içinde artan toplumsal muhalefet ve radikalleşme, özünde kapitalist sistemin ve egemen sınıfın büyüyen krizinden kaynaklanan uluslararası olgulardır. Hükümet bu antidemokratik adımı ABD'de Donald Trump'ın ikinci kez göreve gelmesinin ardından attı. Bizzat Trump yönetimi ABD'de bir başkanlık diktatörlüğü inşa ediyor ve işçiler ve gençler arasında giderek kendisini dışa vuran bir toplumsal muhalefetle karşı karşıya bulunuyor. ABD'de olduğu gibi Türkiye'de de bu otoriter rejim esasen kapitalist sınıfın çıkarlarına ve iktidarına son verebilecek ve iktidarı alarak gerçekten demokratik bir rejim kurabilecek tek toplumsal güç olan işçi sınıfını hedef alıyor. Sosyalist Eşitlik Grubu İmamoğlu dahil tüm siyasi mahpusların derhal serbest bırakılmasını talep ediyor. Bu, parçası olduğumuz Dünya Trotskyist Hareketi 4. Enternasyonel Uluslararası Komitesi'nin Ukraynalı Sosyalist Bogdan Siratyuk başta olmak üzere tüm siyasi mahpusların özgürlüğü için yürüttüğü küresel kampanyanın bir parçasıdır. İşçiler, demokratik hakları ilkesel olarak savunmadan kendi çıkarlarını ve sosyalizm mücadelesini ilerletemezler. Bu, emperyalist savaşa ilkesel olarak karşı çıkma gerekliliği için de bir o kadar geçerlidir. Siyonist İsrail Devleti'nin Gazze'deki Filistinlilere yönelik soykırımı 1,5 yılı aşkın süredir devam ediyor. Bu soykırım, Türkiye'nin de üyesi olduğu NATO'nun İsrail'e tam desteği olmaksızın sürdürülemezdi. Şimdi aynı güçler, aynı emperyalist ve siyonist güçler giderek artan şekilde İran'ı ve müttefiklerini hedef alıyorlar ve tüm bölgeyi kan gölüne çevirecek bir savaşa hazırlanıyorlar. Hedefleri İran dahil tüm Orta Doğu üzerinde tam emperyalist hakimiyet sağlamaktır. Sosyalist Eşitlik Grubu Türkiye'nin NATO'dan çıkmasını ve İsrail ile tüm ilişkilerini kesmesini talep etmektedir. ABD ve İsrail yararına kullanılan askeri üsler kapatılmalı ve Azerbaycan'dan İsrail'e petrol akışına aracılık etmeye son verilmelidir. Filistin'den, İran'dan, Yemen'den ve tüm Orta Doğu'dan elinizi çekin. Bu sadece NATO'nun ikinci büyük ordusunun başında bulunan Erdoğan'ın hükümetine değil, CHP dahil tüm NATO ve emperyalizm yanlısı partilere karşı mücadele demektir. Bu, işçi sınıfını emperyalizme ve siyonizme karşı Orta Doğu ve dünya çapında devrimci sosyalist bir program temelinde birleştirme mücadelesinin parçasıdır. Orta Doğu'da 10 yıllardır tırmanarak devam eden savaş felaketi, emperyalist ulus devlet sisteminin bir ürünüdür ve ancak onunla birlikte son bulabilir. Türk, Kürt, Arap, Fars, Yahudi ve diğer milliyetlerden Orta Doğu işçilerinin bu mücadeledeki müttefikleri, kapitalist sistemin bir parçası olan ve programları iflas eden burjuva milliyetçi rejimler ve hareketler değil, Amerikan, Avrupa ve uluslararası işçi sınıfıdır. Sloganımız ve hedefimiz Orta Doğu Sosyalist Federasyonu'dur. Bu mücadelenin öznesi, kapitalist partilerin denetimindeki sendikal bürokrasilere baş kaldırarak harekete geçmeye başlayan işçi sınıfıdır. İşçilerin hayat pahalılığına karşı daha iyi ücretler ve çalışma koşulları uğruna gelişmekte olan fiili grev hareketi, diğer ülkelerde aynı sorunlarla ve aynı sınıf düşmanıyla karşı karşıya olan işçilerin mücadeleleriyle birleştirilmelidir. Taban komitelerinin Uluslararası İşçi İttifakı, işte bunun için gereken aracı sağlamaktadır. İşçi sınıfının ve gençliğin sosyal koşullarını iyileştirme mücadelesi, demokrasi uğruna ve emperyalist savaşa karşı uluslararası mücadelenin ayrılmaz bir parçası olarak geliştirilmelidir. Tüm bu mücadele özünde kapitalizme karşı sosyalizm mücadelesidir. Bir avuç vurguncu oligark ile dünya nüfusunun çoğunluğunu oluşturan işçi sınıfı arasındaki son kavgadır. Türkiye'de Mart ayında patlak veren kitlesel protestolarda artan toplumsal eşitsizliğin ve hoşnutsuzluğun, gelecek kaygısının büyük bir rolü vardı. Eksik olan, temelde kapitalist sistemden kaynaklanan bu küresel toplumsal sorunların nasıl üstesinden gelineceğine ve özel kâra değil ama sosyal ihtiyaçlara dayanan bir toplumun nasıl inşa edileceğine yol gösteren bir devrimci perspektif ve önderlikti. Sosyalist Eşitlik grubu, DEUK'la birlikte uluslararası işçi sınıfının nesnel devrimci konumuna ve rolüne dayanan bu perspektifi geliştiriyor ve bu önderliği inşa ediyor. Karşı karşıya olduğumuz hiçbir temel toplumsal ve siyasi sorun, kapitalist sınıfın haksız servetine ve iktidarına el koymadan çözülemez. Ve küresel olarak bütünleşmiş bir ekonomide bu çözümler uluslararası olmak zorundadır. İstanbul'da ve Marmara bölgesinde milyonlarca insanın hayatının tehlikede olduğunu açığa vuran son depremlerde bu programın aciliyetini göstermiştir. Kapitalist sınıfın sömürü ve mali vurgun yoluyla elde ettiği servet kamulaştırılmalıdır. Hem bu toplumsal servet hem de savaşa ve militarizme çarçur edilen devasa kaynaklar, can güvenliği başta olmak üzere acil toplumsal sorunların hızla çözülmesi için kullanılmalıdır. Bu devasa toplumsal dönüşüm, sosyal serveti yaratan ve dünya ekonomisini işler kılan işçi sınıfının sosyalist devrim yoluyla iktidarı almasını gerektirmektedir. Sosyalist Eşitlik Grubu ve onun DEUK'a bağlı kardeş partileri dünyanın dört bir yanında işte bunun için mücadele ediyor. Bu 1 Mayıs'ta bizi dinleyen herkesi Türkiye'de ve dünya genelinde DEUK'un ve Sosyalist Eşitlik Partilerinin inşasına katılmaya çağırıyorum. Tüm burjuva düzen partilerinden ve onları desteklemekten başka bir yol olmadığını söyleyen sözde sol partilerden kopun. Türkiye'de Sosyalist Eşitlik Partisi'nin kuruluş sürecine katılın.
Hey everyone, my name is Mamadou Tao. For those who have maybe familiar with my case, we sued Trump and effectively the Trump administration retaliated, tried to arrest and detain me. I left the country with my head held high. And I think this is important to note that this is all being done to shut down legitimate activity that is done in the service of trying to stop a genocide. I'm looking forward to seeing you all at this event, and I want to thank particularly my fantastic legal team, the World Socialist Web Site, who are great supporters, and so many others who are in my corner. And on this, recording this on this blessed May the 1st, we have nothing to lose but our chains. Let's end this genocide.
Students and young people around the world are fighting for a future free of war, fascism, social inequality, economic crisis, and climate catastrophe. Last summer, They took the lead in protest movements in Kenya and Bangladesh that shook those countries' governments to the core. And in Greece, they were in the front lines of a fight for justice after the deadly Tempe rail crash and the state cover-up which followed. They initiated historic protests in Serbia against government corruption triggered by the Novi Sad train station collapse. And in all of the main imperialist countries, they've taken up the struggle against the Gaza genocide and the complicity of their own governments. Our last May Day rally was held amidst the wave of student encampments rolling across the US, UK, and elsewhere. The Biden administration and other world governments responded with brutal police crackdowns on these encampments. But now, Donald Trump, Keir Starmer, and their international counterparts are deepening this repression with academic suspensions, arrests, and deportations. These include the pro-Palestinian student activists Mahmoud Khalil, Mamadou Tal, and Rumeysa Ozturk, who have either been arrested by ICE Gestapo agents or, in the case of Tal, forced to self-deport from the US. And despite being a British Gambian citizen, Tal was abandoned by the Starmer government. The International Youth and Students for Social Equality have participated energetically in this global movement of young people, and we stand in solidarity with all students and workers facing political repression. And we fight to bring forward the political lessons which must guide the struggle in defence of democratic rights and for the end to fascism and war. These are the lessons of Marxism, the lessons of Trotskyism. And there is no shortage of determination and self-sacrifice amongst young people today, or of hostility to social inequality, military violence and police state rule. What must be developed is an understanding of the capitalist system at the root of these problems, and of the revolutionary class struggle which can bring it to an end. Immense pressure is being brought to bear on politically active young people to prevent such conclusions from being drawn. The professional ideologues of the bourgeoisie, aided by the pseudo-left, promote all manners of reformist, pacifist and nationalist diversions. And above all, a scepticism in the revolutionary potential of the working class. This must be fought and overcome. Students and young people cannot meet the enormous political and social challenges they confront by themselves. They cannot pressure capitalist governments and politicians to act in their name. The horrors and injustices multiplying across the world today are the responsibility of the capitalist class mired in crisis. It sees no way out except through war on the working class at home and abroad. And there is no fixing this social system. It must be overthrown. That task falls to the international working class. The last years have seen waves of strikes throughout the world as workers are driven to fight against intolerable social conditions. To this point, workers' struggles have been reined in by trade union bureaucracies acting arm in arm with the capitalist governments and major corporations. But support for rank-and-file rebellion is growing, led by the IWA RFC. Aiding this rebellion is a vital task for socialist-minded students and young workers. A return to the level of class struggle seen in the revolutionary decades of the 20th century will transform the political situation, turning the tide on right-wing reaction. The most decisive political role to be played by young people is to help infuse the emerging working class movement with a Marxist political culture. That begins by educating ourselves. The IYSSE, the youth movement of the International Committee of the Fourth International, stands in the tradition of the Russian Revolution. We stand in continuity with Leon Trotsky for the fight for socialist internationalism against the nationalist counter-revolution represented by Stalinism. We base ourselves on the decades-long struggle against every political tendency which has tried to liquidate the Fourth International founded by Leon Trotsky. These are the principal foundations for the mass revolutionary socialist movement against capitalism and war, which must be built. Join the IYSSE today to begin your own training as a fighter for Trotskyism for the working class, and take your place in the ranks of revolutionary fighters for a socialist future.
O 1º de maio é o dia em que celebramos a unidade internacional da classe trabalhadora. Jamais os trabalhadores estiveram tão integrados internacionalmente, operando juntos o grande chão de fábrica da produção globalizada. E, ao mesmo tempo, nunca foi tão urgente uma afirmação política dessa unidade internacional. O retorno de Trump à Casa Branca marca um realinhamento da política externa do imperialismo americano rumo à dominação do hemisfério ocidental, vista como um passo necessário à sua ofensiva contra a China. Em um discurso ao Congresso dos Estados Unidos em fevereiro, o comandante do Southcom, o almirante Alvin Halsey, explicou, abre aspas, a região da América Latina e do Caribe está na linha de frente de uma disputa decisiva e urgente para definir o futuro do nosso mundo. A China está atacando os interesses dos Estados Unidos em todas as frentes, em todos os domínios. Se não conseguirmos competir aqui e agora, a região ficará sob a influência dos principais rivais autoritários dos Estados Unidos, o que ameaça diretamente o giro dos Estados Unidos para o Indo-Pacífico. Fecha aspas. Washington, disse Halsey, precisa responder presença com presença. Essa doutrina aberta de intimidação pela força foi demonstrada com a maior clareza nas recentes investidas ao Canal do Panamá. Agindo como um gangster à frente do exército mais poderoso do mundo, Trump ameaçou invadir o país soberano para forçar o Panamá a romper acordos com a China e arrancar concessões militares significativas. Aos olhos indignados de milhões de trabalhadores da região, essa política neocolonial escancarada se soma ao tratamento humilhante sendo dirigido aos imigrantes latino-americanos nos Estados Unidos. Trabalhadores e as suas famílias que atravessaram a fronteira em busca de uma vida melhor estão sendo caçados e deportados, amarrados dentro de um avião, sem água nem comida, sob os maus tratos de guardas que pouco devem à Gestapo. Esta se tornou a experiência americana na consciência coletiva da América Latina. Os ataques aos imigrantes são a ponta de lança dos esforços da oligarquia capitalista americana para erguer uma ditadura nos Estados Unidos. E nesse, assim como em outros aspectos, o destino da classe trabalhadora da América Latina e dos Estados Unidos está completamente atado. Os acordos entre Trump e o seu aliado fascista Nayib Bukele para expandir o complexo prisional de El Salvador e enviar milhares de presos estadunidenses e de outras nacionalidades evoca imagens sinistras do futuro e do passado. A construção de um complexo transnacional de repressão, prisão e tortura retoma diretamente a experiência da Operação Condor, estabelecida há exatamente 50 anos, em 1975. Condor foi a culminação da colaboração assassina entre o imperialismo dos Estados Unidos e as ditaduras militares fascistas que se consolidaram na América Latina com o apoio da CIA. Essa rede de terror contra-revolucionário transformou o continente em um labirinto de horror, nas palavras da autora argentina Stella Caloni. Ela escreveu: um exilado político podia ser sequestrado, tomado como refém e levado para o outro lado da fronteira, torturado e desaparecido, sem qualquer autorização judicial. A tentativa da oligarquia americana em crise de reerguer a doutrina Monroe no século XXI, valendo-se apenas da força bruta, pode bem ser caracterizada como insana. Mas a insanidade desses planos tem raízes absolutamente reais na crise incontornável do sistema imperialista. Essa crise não abre espaço para um novo equilíbrio, em que outra potência suplantará o lugar de Washington e do dólar americano. Nem para uma nova ordem multipolar pacífica. A erupção da guerra imperialista é a sua manifestação mais genuína. Nada seria mais fatal para a classe trabalhadora latino-americana do que ser tragada para a agitação nacionalista sendo promovida pelas classes dominantes nos seus próprios países. A erupção da agressão imperialista não unifica de fora as classes sociais dentro dos países latino-americanos. Ao contrário, ela acentua os seus profundos antagonismos sociais. No Brasil, o governo Lula respondeu às tarifas de Trump, promovendo o slogan "O Brasil para os brasileiros". Essa campanha visa usar da impopularidade dos ataques de Washington para subordinar os trabalhadores à burguesia nacional falida e para fazer com que eles engulam os ataques crescentes contra os seus padrões de vida. Nos últimos anos, a América Latina esteve em um estado contínuo de agitação política e social. Greves e protestos massivos, clamando por igualdade social de uma vez por todas, sacudiram todos os países da região. A classe dominante respondeu com um giro universal para a direita, com a reabilitação dos herdeiros das ditaduras militares dos anos 70, com Javier Milei na Argentina, Bolsonaro no Brasil, Daniel Noboa no Equador, que junto com Bukele são as estrelas fascistas da CEPAC que inspiram e são inspiradas pelo governo da maior potência capitalista mundial. Que o que tem a oferecer os governos e os partidos da maré rosa, a grande esperança da pseudo-esquerda mundial? Capitulação atrás de capitulação aos fascistas, em nome de restaurar a unidade nacional perdida e o sistema político burguês em frangalhos, eles impõem austeridade capitalista, políticas de repressão, encarceramento em massa e o fortalecimento dos militares. A classe trabalhadora e a juventude estão prontas para lutar, seja para resistir às medidas de choque capitalista, como para ter um acerto de contas definitivo com o legado persistente das ditaduras e do imperialismo. Mas uma virada política decisiva é urgente. O Comitê Internacional da Quarta Internacional e o Grupo Socialista pela Igualdade convocam os trabalhadores no Brasil e de toda a América Latina para romper com os meios políticos nacionais apodrecidos, dominados pela burguesia, e a se unirem a seus irmãos de classe nos Estados Unidos e internacionalmente para lutar contra o capitalismo, a guerra e o fascismo. Adiante a construção da Aliança Operária Internacional dos Comitês de Base, os organismos da democracia operária no século XXI.
Revolutionary greetings to all those attending today's May Day rally from throughout the world. In just over 3 months, Donald Trump and RFK Jr. have unleashed a fascist war on science and public health unlike anything in modern American history. They are carrying out a scorched earth campaign to destroy all the gains won by generations of workers and scientists. It is a counter-revolution designed to drag global society back to the conditions of industrial slavery and barbarism not seen since the Nazi regime. Let us be clear about what has taken place. In just 3 months, over 20,000 scientists and public health workers have been fired from the Department of Health and Human Services, gutting the CDC, NIH, FDA, and every other agency responsible for the health and safety of the population. 90% of the staff at the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, NIOSH, have been terminated, ending research into workplace safety, chemical exposure, and protective equipment. The CDC's Global Health Center and chronic disease prevention programs have been dissolved, crippling outbreak detection in over 40 countries and halting diabetes and heart disease tracking for tens of millions. Dozens of other programs and agencies have been eviscerated, including many related to climate change and environmental sciences. Thousands of pages of scientific information have been scrubbed from government websites in a form of modern-day book burning, while gag orders silence scientists and prevent the public from accessing vital health information. This is not cost-saving. It is a deliberate, fascist effort to destroy the infrastructure of scientific research and public health that underpin modern society. These attacks have vast global ramifications. The planned elimination of PEPFAR funding will deny HIV/AIDS treatment to tens of millions, reversing decades of progress and condemning millions of people to death. A recent scientific model projects that if these cuts are not reversed, 25 million people will die preventable deaths over the next 15 years, including 15 million from HIV/AIDS alone, with sub-Saharan Africa hit particularly hard. The US withdrawal from the World Health Organization and the dismantling of pandemic surveillance programs means the world is now flying blind in the face of new and emerging threats. These include H5N1 bird flu, which scientists warn requires only one mutation to develop the capacity for human-to-human transmission. The reckless policies of the Trump administration are not simply the product of incompetence, though this is certainly in no short supply. But more fundamentally, these fascists are consciously implementing a eugenicist program, reviving the Nazi doctrine of lebensunwertes Leben, or life unworthy of life, treating the vulnerable and all those who die from these policies as a worthy sacrifice at the altar of corporate profits. Kennedy's own statements dehumanizing autistic people echo the fascist propaganda that justified the extermination of the disabled through the Nazis' infamous T4 program. His fraudulent studies on vaccines and autism, led by the notorious anti-vaccine quack David Geyer, are not about protecting the vulnerable, but about scapegoating and eliminating them through neglect and deprivation. The Orwellian Make America Healthy Again Commission, framed as a supposed fight against chronic disease, is a Trojan horse for dismantling Medicare, Medicaid, and disability services while funneling billions to the financial oligarchy. Their real aim is to drive down life expectancy, sending workers to an early grave as soon as they retire. This social counter-revolution cannot be understood until one grapples with the experience of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, which over the past 5 years has killed more than 1.5 million Americans and disabled over 20 million more with long COVID. Globally, there are now 30 million excess deaths due to COVID-19, and over 400 million continue to suffer from long COVID. Officially proclaiming the pandemic is over, the HHS is attempting to stop all research into long COVID and next-generation vaccines. COVID.gov, once a hub for public health resources, has been transformed into a propaganda outlet, erasing science and replacing it with lies and anti-China hysteria. The path to Trump and Kennedy was paved by the Biden administration. Having falsely pledged to follow the science in the 2020 elections, Biden instead normalized mass COVID infection and dismantled public health infrastructure. Throughout the pandemic, both capitalist parties in the US and their counterparts globally have subordinated public health to the profit interests of the corporate financial elite. Following the same profit-driven logic, every capitalist political party in the world is facilitating the climate catastrophe which deepens every year. Billions are now threatened with displacement through rising sea levels, starvation through droughts, and death from wildfires, hurricanes, and other so-called natural disasters. The development of science and public health cannot be entrusted to the capitalist politicians or the trade union bureaucrats that have stifled workers' opposition. The international working class must organize independently, building rank-and-file committees to unite with scientists and health workers around the world. We must demand the immediate reversal of all cuts, the rehiring of all fired workers, free and universal access to healthcare, and the restoration of scientific integrity and public health data. Above all, we must fight for a world socialist program to advance science and public health based on democratic workers' control of all scientific institutions, pharmaceutical monopolies, healthcare programs, energy corporations, and more. The fight for science and public health is inseparable from the fight for socialism. Only through the building of a mass socialist movement can we defeat the fascist danger and secure a future in which science serves humanity, not profit, war, and extermination. Join us in this fight for the future.
Revolutionary greetings on this May Day. As we celebrate the holiday of the international working class, Marion Books, the publishing arm of the World Socialist Web Site, is offering a 20% discount on all our titles. Today's speakers make clear that the scope of the challenges we confront and the urgency of the political situation require the most serious attention to the lessons of history, above all, the history of the socialist movement and of the Fourth International. This May Day, we place emphasis on the following works. Sounding the Alarm, Socialism Against War. This volume contains May Day speeches given by David North from 2014 to 2024, an extraordinary year-by-year analysis of the relentless escalation of imperialist war and the growing danger of a nuclear Third World War. In light of the US-NATO war against Russia and Ukraine and the Gaza genocide, this collection has the prescience of the Marxist perspective found nowhere else in this period. Other issues examined in the May Day speeches include the global impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, the resurgence of fascism, the global economic crisis, and the growth of the international class struggle. The rise of Trump and the crisis of American democracy. Published in March 2025, this volume contains the most essential statements published by the WSWS on Trump's second term in office and his efforts to establish a fascist dictatorship in the United States, themes central to this May Day rally. The Logic of Zionism, From Nationalist Myth to the Gaza Genocide. This book brings together 5 lectures made by David North since October 2023, analyzing the historical background to the US-backed Israeli genocide in Gaza. The lectures offer penetrating analysis of the reactionary, ideological, and political foundations of Zionism, and provide a perspective on the way forward for workers and youth fighting in defense of the Palestinians. The Russian Revolution and the Unfinished 20th Century. The 20th century posed fundamental questions that humanity continues to grapple with today. Economic crises, the rise of fascism, and world war. In this book, North demonstrates why these problems confront us more sharply today than ever before, and what must be done to carry out a successful world socialist revolution. This is a foundational work for anyone new to socialist politics. Leon Trotsky and the Struggle for Socialism in the 21st Century. The events of the last 100 years have vindicated Trotsky's struggle for the perspective of world socialist revolution. This work, a collection of essays written by North over a period spanning 40 years, elaborates the key contributions made by Trotsky to the development of Marxism and the burning relevance of his work today. You can find these titles and more at Mering.com in North America and at the URLs below worldwide.
සහෝදරවරුනි මිත්‍රවරුනි අප්‍රේල් 22 වෙනිදා
ඉන්දියානු පාලනයටතේ පවතින කාශ්මීර ප්‍රදේශයේ සිදුවුණු ම්ලේච්ඡ ත්‍රස්ත ප්‍රහාරයට පාකිස්තානය වග කියන්න ඕන කියලා ඉන්දියාව කරපු චෝදනාවෙන් පස්සේ ඉන්දියාව සහ පාකිස්තානය වේගයෙන් යුද්ධයක් දැසට ඇදී යනවා. ඒ සමගම දකුණු ආසියාව දූදේශපාලනික ආතතියින් බල වාසූතිලට ඇදගෙනමින් තිබෙනවා.
1947 முதல் 2 அணு ஆயுத நாடுகளும் ஏற்கனவே 3 போர்களை நடத்தியுள்ள போதிலும் இப்போது அவற்றின் கசப்பான போட்டியானது சீனாவுக்கு எதிரான அமெரிக்காவின் போர் தயாரிப்புகளுடன் ஆபத்தான முறையில் பின்னி பிணைந்தவர்களுடன் ஒரு பரந்த மோதல் வெடிப்பதற்கான அச்சுறுத்தலை கொண்டுள்ளது. பாகிஸ்தான் சீனாவுடன் இணைந்திருக்கும் அதேவேளை இந்தியாவானது தெற்காசியாவில் அமெரிக்காவின் மூலோபாய பங்காளியாகும்.
සමාජවාදී සමානතා පක්ෂය ධනවාදයට සහ යුද තර්ජනයට අවසන් තිත තැබීමේ ජාත්‍යන්තර කම්පරපන්තියේ ඒකාබද්ධ යුද විරෝධී ව්‍යාපාරික කොටසක් ලෙස දකුණු ආසියාව පුරා කම්පරුවන් සහ තරුණයන් බලමුළු ගැන්වීමේ අපගේ ප්‍රයත්නයන් දෙගුණ තෙගුණ කරනවා.
போர் உந்துதலை தூண்டிவிட்டு வரும் முதலாளித்துவத்தின் பூகோள நெருக்கடியும் முதலாளித்துவ ஆட்சியின் ஆழமடைந்து வரும் நெருக்கடியும் வர்க்கப் போராட்டத்தின் எழுச்சியும் இலங்கையில் கூர்மையான வடிவத்தை எடுக்கின்றன. 2022 அரசாங்கம் கடன்களை திருப்பி செலுத்துவதை தவறியமை பேரழிவு தரும் சமூக நெருக்கடியை தூண்டியது. இதனால் மில்லியன் கணக்கான தொழிலாளர்களை வீதியில் இறங்கி போராடினர். ஜனாதிபதி நாட்டை விட்டு வெளியேற நிர்பந்திக்கப்பட்டார். இந்த நிலையில் அரசியல் ஸ்தாபனத்தால் வெகுஜன ஆதரவு இல்லாத ரணில் விக்ரமசிங்க பதவியில் அமர்த்தப்பட்டு அவர் கடுமையான சிக்கன நிபந்தனைகளுடன் சர்வதேச நாணயத்தின் கடனை பெறுவதற்கு பேச்சுவார்த்தை நடத்தினார்.
පහුගිය අවුරුද්දේදී කම්පරුවන්ගේ සහ දොගීන්ගේ විරුද්ධත්වය පාලනය කරන්න වික්‍රමසිංහ අපොහොසත් බව කොන්දේසියටදී පාලක පන්තිය හැරුණේ හොඳටම අපකීර්තියට පත් වෙලා තිබුණු සම්ප්‍රදායික පක්ෂ දෙතර නෙවි. ජනතා විමුක්ති පෙරමුණ සහ එහි මැතිවරණ පෙරමුණ වන ජාතික ජන බලවේගය වෙතටයි. ඊට කලින් කිසිදාක බලය නොසිටි ජවිපේ බලයට ආවේ ජාතියේ ගැලුම්කාරය ලෙස තමන්ම ප්‍රවර්ධනය කරගනිමින් සහ මහජනතාවගේ දුක් වේදනාවන් අවසන් කරන බවට පොරොන්දු දෙන අතරෙම මූල්‍ය අරමුදලේ න්‍යාය පත්‍රයේ ක්‍රියාවට දැමීමට තමන්ට පවතින අදිෂ්ඨානය ගැන මහ ව්‍යාපාරිකයන්ට සංඥා කරමු.
அதன் வெற்றியை அரசியல் ஸ்தாபனம் உலக அளவில் வரவேற்றது. சர்வதேச ஊடகங்கள் ஒரு இடதுசாரி மற்றும் மார்க்சிய கட்சி ஆட்சியை கைப்பற்றி அறிவித்தன. ஜேவிபி சர்வதேச நாணயத்தின் ஈராக்கப்பட்டு திருக்கும் என்றும் எந்தொரு எதிர்ப்பையும் அடங்குவதற்கு போலீஸ் நடவடிக்கைகளை நாடத் தாங்கும் என்ற சோசியலிஸ்ட் சமூகத்தை மட்டுமே எச்சரித்தது.
සිංහල සෝත්තම්වාදයේ කරවටක් ගිල්ලා ඉන්න ජවිපේ ඔවුන්ගේ සමාජවාදී වාචාල කතා අතාරලා දැන් බොහෝ කල. ඔවුන්ගේ අධිරාජ්‍ය විරෝධී පූජා නම් එක්සත් ජනපද තානාපති කාර්යාලයේ පැවැත්වුණු රහස් සාකච්ඡා මගින් විස්ථාපනය වෙලා. අපි මතක් කළා ඔවුන් දහස් සංඛ්‍යාත කම්පරුවන් තරුණයන් සහ දේශපාලන විරුද්ධවාදීන් පැසිස්වාදී ආකාරයට ඝාතනය කිරීම ගැන. ජවිපේ ඔවුන් එසේ මරා දැම්මේ 1980 ගණන් අග ඉන්දු ලංකා ගිවිසුමට එරෙහි ජවිපේ දක්ෂිණාංශික දේශප්‍රේමී උද්ඝෝෂණයට ඒකාබද්ධ වීම ඔවුන් ප්‍රතික්ෂේප කරපු නිසා.
ஜனாதிபதி அனுரகுமாரநாயக்க பதவியேற்றதும் ஜேவிபி என்பிபி கொடுத்த அனைத்து வாக்குறுதிகளை நிராகரித்தார். நிதியமைச்சராக இந்த ஆண்டு அவரது வரவு செலவு திட்டமானது அதுக்கு சொந்தமான நிறுவனங்களை விரைவில் விற்பனை செய்தல், தொழிலாளர்கள் மீது அதிக வரிகளை சுமத்துதல், சுகாதாரம் மற்றும் கல்விக்கான செலவுகளை கடுமையாக வெட்டுதல் உட்பட சர்வதேச நாணயத்தின் கோரிக்கைகளை கண்டிப்பாக கடைப்பிடித்தது மற்றும் வேலை நியமனங்கள் அனைத்தையும் தாக்குதல் உள்ளாக்கின. சர்வதேச நாணயத்தின் நிர்வாக இயக்குனர் ஜோர்ஜீவா திசநாயக்காவுக்கு திரு ஜனாதிபதி வாழ்த்துக்கள், என் இதயம் உங்களுடன் இருக்கிறது என்று செய்தி அனுப்பியதில் ஆச்சரியமில்லை.
කම්පරුපන්තිය ඔවුන්ගේ සමාජ සහ ප්‍රජාතාන්ත්‍ර අයිතිය විනාශ කිරීම නිකම් පිළිගන්න එකක් නෑ. දැනටමත් පාසල් සම්වර්ධන නිලධාරී, විශ්වවිද්‍යාල අනත් දෙන කම්පරුවන් සහ සෞඛ්‍ය කම්පරුවන් අතරේ අරගල පැන නැගිලා තියෙනවා. ආණ්ඩුව දැනටමත් ප්‍රතිචාර දක්වලා තියෙන්නේ පොලිස් ප්‍රචණ්ඩත්වයේ මුදා හැරලා. ට්‍රම්ප්ගේ තීරුබදු යලිත් වතාවක් ශ්‍රී ලංකා ආර්ථිකය කඩා වැටීමේ තර්ජනය මතු කරන කොන්දේසි යටතේ මෙම පන්ති අරගල අනිවාර්යයෙන්ම උස්සන්න වෙනවා ඇති.
இந்த தீவில் நடக்கும் நிகழ்வுகள் தெற்காசியா மற்றும் உலகளவில் தொழிலாளர்கள் எதிர்கொள்ளும் விடயங்களுக்கு ஒரு முன்னோடியாகும். ஆளும் வர்க்கங்கள் பாசிச மற்றும் சர்வாதிகார ஆட்சி வடிவங்களுடன் ஊர்மையாக வலது நோக்கி நகர்ந்து வருகின்றன. சர்வதேச தொழிலாளி வர்க்கம் அதன் நலன்களுக்காக போராட அதன் சொந்த சுயாதீன அமைப்புகளை உருவாக்க வேண்டும்.
2022 මහජනර්ගලය තුළදී අපි කැදවුම් කරා කම්පරුවන්ගේ සහ ගම්බද ජනතාවගේ ප්‍රජාතන්ත්‍ර සහ සමාජවාදී සම්මේලනයකට. දිවෙන පුරා වැඩපොළවල්වල නිවහම් ප්‍රදේශවල සහ ගම්බෙද ප්‍රදේශවල ගොඩනගෙන ස්වාධීන ක්‍රියාකාරී කමිටුවල නියෝජිතයන් මත පදනම් විය යුතු එම සම්මේලනය සිංහල දෙමළ සහ මුස්ලිම් කම්පරුවන් ඒකාබද්ධ කරන්න ඇති. ධනපති පන්තියට ඔවුන්ගේ ආණ්ඩුවක් සහ රාජ්‍යන්ත්‍රයක් තියෙනවා. කම්පරු පන්තිය සහ ගම්බද ජනතාව තමන්ගේම මූලෝපාය ගැන සාකච්ඡා කරන්න, සැලසුම් කරන්න සහ ඒ ක්‍රියාවට දාන්න අපගේම දේශපාලන මධ්‍යස්ථානයක් ගොඩනගා ගන්න ඕන.
அத்தகைய மகாநாட்டுக்கான சோசலிச சமத்துவ கட்சியின் போராட்டம் இன்று மிகவும் அவசரமானதாகும். முதலாளித்துவ ஆட்சியை தூக்கி எறிந்து தொழிலாளர்கள் மற்றும் விவசாயிகள் அரசாங்கத்தை நிறுவுவதற்காக ஒரு சக்தி வாய்ந்த சோசலிச இயக்கத்தில் தொழிலாளி வர்க்கத்தையும் கிராமப்புற ஏழைகளையும் இளைஞர்களையும் சுயாதீனமாக அருந்துவதற்கு ஒரு வழிமுறையாகும். தெற்காசியாவிலும் சர்வதேச அளவிலும் சோசலிச குடியரசு ஒன்றியத்தின் ஒரு பகுதியாக இலங்கை ஈழம் சோசலிச குடியரசுக்காக நாங்கள் போராடுகின்றோம்.
අපි ශ්‍රී ලංකාවේ සහ දකුණු ආසියාවේ කම්පරුවන්ගෙන්, තරුණයන්ගෙන්, ගම්බද වැඩ කරන ජනයාගෙන් සහ සමාජවාදී හිතති බුද්ධිමතුන්ගෙන් ඉල්ලා සිටින්නේ මෙම තීරණාත්මක දේශපාලන අරගලය තුළ අප සමග එකතු වෙන ලෙසයි.
ஏப்ரல் 20 அன்று 85 வயதில் காலமான மூத்த ரொஸ்கித தலைவர் தோழர் நந்த விக்ரமசிங்காவுக்கு அஞ்சலி செலுத்துவதுடன் நாங்கள் நிறைவு செய்கிறோம். நமது சர்வதேச இயக்கம் முழுவதும் தொழிலாளர் விக்ஸ் என்று அறியப்பட்ட அவர் 1968 புரட்சிகர கம்யூனிஸ்ட் கழகத்தின் சாப உறுப்பினர் இருந்தார். அவர் வாழ்க்கை தெற்காசியாவில் லியோன் ட்ரொஸ்கியின் நிரந்தர புரட்சி கோட்பாட்டுக்கான கட்சியின் அனைத்து அரசியல் போராட்டங்களை உள்ளடக்கியதாகும். அது வரவிருக்கும் புரட்சிகர காலத்துக்கு அத்தியாவசியமான படிப்பினைகளை வழங்கும். நன்றி.
ඔබට ස්තුතියි.
We are celebrating May Day amid a massive breakdown of global capitalism, as comrades have detailed. The official campaign in the Australian federal election, held yesterday, was a dirty conspiracy of the ruling elite and its political representatives to conceal this reality from working people. Labor and the Liberals, the traditional parties of capitalist rule, entered the campaign in a crisis, with masses of people viewing them correctly as the corrupt instruments of the banks and the corporations. Their campaign consisted of banalities and lies, haggling over a few dollars a week in tax or fuel concessions, under conditions of the worst social crisis in decades. The ideological core of the election con job was the claim that Australia is an exception. In Labor Prime Minister Anthony Albanese's words, it is, quote unquote, uniquely placed to weather the geopolitical and economic storms epitomised by Trump's trade war. Nothing could be further from the truth. As the Socialist Equality Party alone raised in our campaign, Australian capitalism is placed for a battering. The bourgeoisie is completely dependent on mineral exports to China, the central target of Trump's trade war. The economy is already in a slump, and the working class has been hit with the biggest reversal in living standards since World War II. Albanese and Liberal leader Peter Dutton tried to avoid mention of Trump at all costs. He is political poison. According to polls, up to 70% of the population is hostile to Trump and his program of economic war, militarism and dictatorship. But, try as they might, he intruded. Some media outlets noted that there were really three figures in the Australian election campaign: Albanese, Dutton and Trump. When the major parties did mention this fascistic gangster in the White House, it was to compete over who could best work with him, above all in the confrontation with Beijing. That is because dominant sections of the Australian bourgeoisie view their own predatory interests, especially in the South Pacific, as best served through involvement in the US war drive against China. Completing Australia's transformation into a frontline state for war with China has been a central focus of the Albanese Labor government over the past 3 years. That includes the $368 billion purchase of nuclear-powered submarines under the AUKUS pact with the UK and the US, equipping every branch of the military with missile strike capabilities, and vastly expanding US basing, including for bombers that can carry nuclear weapons. In this campaign, all the pro-capitalist parties have come out as warmongers. The Greens have dropped their pacifist mask, outlining their own program for missiles and drones directed against China. Last year, they correctly raised that the Labour government was complicit in the Gaza genocide. Now, their national leaders won't mention it because they are begging for a coalition with Labour. They denounced the slaughter to win popular support. Now that they want to join a pro-genocide Labour government, the dead Palestinians are an inconvenience. The official position of the pseudo-left Socialist Alliance is to halve military spending. These Pabloites, in other words, are happy for $28 billion a year to go to the war machine. But much more is being demanded. In the corporate papers, it is raised every day that after the election, military spending must be increased by tens and tens of billions a year. And they say that the money will have to come through massive austerity cuts and a productivity drive to increase the exploitation of the working class. This is a program that will produce enormous struggles by the working class. The Labour government already sought to criminalise pro-Palestinian protests and almost all strikes by workers. The electoral authorities barred the SEP from official registration despite our meeting the onerous membership requirements. This meant that our party name did not appear on the ballot. We did not allow this to prevent us from standing candidates. We won a response because workers and youth want a real alternative. They are seeing through the lies. They want a political movement that really fights against war, austerity and dictatorship. They want a future of peace and social rights. As we insisted, that will not come from the rotten parliament or the capitalist parties. It requires a revolutionary movement of the working class.
The Socialist Equality Group in New Zealand extends revolutionary greetings to all listeners in this country and across the Pacific region who confront the imminent danger of imperialist war, soaring social inequality, and increasingly dictatorial repression by the state. In New Caledonia, workers and youth have spent nearly a year under occupation by thousands of French troops and police. These forces violently suppressed mass protests which erupted last May, fueled by hostility to colonial rule and unprecedented levels of social inequality. The same explosive social crisis exists in Papua New Guinea, a former Australian colony, which was shaken by riots last year in response to appalling levels of poverty. All the imperialist powers are tightening their grip over the Pacific. In an alliance with the United States, Australia and New Zealand are militarizing the whole ocean in preparation for war against China. Australia has established a special Pacific policing initiative, which will be used to crush social unrest. New Zealand's political establishment has furiously denounced the government of the Cook Islands, a semi-colony of New Zealand with fewer than 15,000 inhabitants, because it signed economic agreements with China. One right-wing columnist for the New Zealand Herald suggested that special forces could be sent to occupy the Cook Islands. The idea was endorsed by the Labour Party-aligned Daily blog, which hysterically declared that, quote, China is invading New Zealand. The blog has smeared the Socialist Equality Group as traitors because of our opposition to its anti-China war propaganda. And these are not empty threats. In the past 20 years, New Zealand and Australian troops have repeatedly intervened to defend their predatory interests in the Solomon Islands, East Timor and Tonga. New Zealand's right-wing coalition government is strengthening its integration into Washington's drive to violently redivide the world and reduce billions of people to the status of colonial slaves. It has sent military personnel to assist in the bombing of Yemen. It supports the US-Israeli genocide in Gaza. And it is providing training and other support to Ukrainian forces in the NATO-led war against Russia. The National Party-led government, with bipartisan support from the Labour Party, is planning to double military spending from 1 to 2% of gross domestic product, in line with demands from the United States. Billions of dollars will be wasted on missiles and drones and to recruit more youth into the armed forces. The media is already discussing the possible reintroduction of compulsory military training. This militarist agenda must be opposed. It will be paid for by the working class, which is already facing brutal austerity measures in the healthcare, education and public services sectors enforced by the pro-capitalist union apparatus. The country's biggest trade union, the Public Service Association, supports greater military spending, even as it helps to cut thousands of jobs. Over the past year, there have been mass protests against the Gaza genocide and strikes and protests against cuts to public health. To suppress opposition, the government, backed by the Labour Party, is preparing anti-democratic laws against so-called foreign interference. The Socialist Equality Group is the only political organisation which is fighting to imbue the movement and the working class with the necessary socialist political perspective. This requires a conscious struggle against all the efforts by the political establishment and the trade union bureaucracy to divide the working class based on race, nationality and gender. The far-right parties in the coalition government, the ACT Party and New Zealand First, are following the playbook of Donald Trump, stoking racism and bigotry. Tens of thousands of people have protested against their anti-Maori demagogy over the past year. But the Socialist Equality Group warns that the Maori nationalism and other forms of identity politics promoted by Labour, the Greens, Te Pāti Maori, and the various pseudo-left groups are just as divisive and reactionary. Their aim is to obscure the central division in society, which is not race, but the class gulf between workers and the capitalist elite, and to subordinate workers to different sections of the ruling class, including indigenous capitalists. The notion that Labour represents a kinder, gentler alternative is a fraud. Jacinda Ardern, long hailed by pseudo-left parties internationally, resigned as Prime Minister months before Labour lost the 2023 election in a crushing defeat. Her government oversaw rising homelessness and child poverty, it strengthened the alliance with the United States, and it endorsed Israel's assault on Gaza. Ardern moved to the United States, where she promoted the presidential campaign of Kamala Harris and sought to whitewash the Democrats' record of participation in genocide and its attacks on democratic rights. The only way forward is the struggle for the political independence of the working class from the entire capitalist establishment. That includes building rank-and-file workplace committees to break the stranglehold of the union bureaucracy. And above all, I urge you to join the fight to build sections of the International Committee of the Fourth International, the World Party of Socialist Revolution, in New Zealand, in China, and throughout Asia and the Pacific.
The breakdown in relations between North America's imperialist powers, Canada and the United States, raises pivotal questions of revolutionary perspective, program, and strategy for the international working class. Above all, the necessity of it rejecting all forms of nationalism, protectionism, and militarism, and making socialist internationalism the axis of all its struggles. Last Monday, Canada had a federal election. The campaign was dominated throughout by Trump's global trade war and his threats to use economic force to transform the country into America's 51st state. After weeks of all the parties trumpeting bellicose Canadian nationalism, the Liberals, under their newly minted leader, the former central banker and blue-chip corporate executive Mark Carney, were able to retain power. They did so by riding on a wave of popular hostility to the fascist would-be dictator Trump. That the big business Liberals, who just weeks ago were facing a crushing electoral defeat, were able to capitalize on working people's hostility to Trump is entirely due to the reactionary politics of the organizations that claim to speak in the name of the working class, the trade unions and the Social Democratic New Democratic Party, or NDP. For decades, they have suppressed the class struggle while telling workers that they need to ally with the Liberals, the ruling class's traditional party of national government, to block the coming to power of the Conservatives, the most open proponents of capitalist reaction. Since 2019, the NDP, at the union's behest, has propped up right-wing minority Liberal governments that implemented the ruling class's ruinous profits before lives COVID-19 pandemic policy, waged war on Russia, led the smearing and repression of anti-Gaza genocide protests, imposed inflation-driven real wage cuts, and criminalized strikes. And the union and NDP leaders rushed to join the Liberal government's trade war councils, giving their full-throated support to Ottawa's retaliatory tariffs targeting American workers' jobs and living standards. The political ideological cement of the corporatist partnership that the Labour bureaucrats have forged with Canadian capital and its state is reactionary Canadian and Quebec nationalism based on the lie that Canadian capitalism constitutes a more progressive, gentler, kinder society compared to the rapacious dollar republic to the south. As Trotsky observed, the Labour lieutenants of capital always seek to dragoon the working class behind the bourgeoisie in its trade, geopolitical, and military conflicts by claiming that the imperialist state to which they owe their allegiance and privileges is more democratic or socially advanced than that of the enemy. So it was in the two imperialist world wars of the last century. So it is today. Insofar as Carney or any of the political representatives of the ruling class oppose Trump, it is solely from the standpoint of defending the Canadian ruling class's profits, global geostrategic interests, and first right to exploit the workers of Canada and its abundant resources. Even now, far and away the preferred option of the Canadian bourgeoisie is to secure a duly recognized role as a junior partner of Washington and Wall Street in a Trump-led fortress North America aimed at securing U.S. global hegemony against China and all comers. Workers are in for a rude awakening. The Carney Liberal government will quickly prove to be the most right-wing in Canadian history. It will be a government of austerity, rearmament, and war, as already indicated by its cribbing of key policies of the Conservatives, who, like the Republicans in the United States, have increasingly morphed into a party of the far right. Trump is a menace to the workers of Canada and the world, but workers can't fight him and all he represents, oligarchy, dictatorship, and imperialist war, by lining up with the Canadian bourgeoisie, any of its rival factions or political representatives. Rather, they must assert their independent class interests by forging a movement for workers' power and fighting to fuse their struggles with the mass opposition to Trump now emerging within the American working class. As an essential first step in mounting a challenge to the decrepit world capitalist order, workers must repudiate the Union-NDP Liberal alliance and Canadian and Quebec nationalism, which for decades have been employed to bind them hand and foot to the ruling class. As the Socialist Equality Party Canada explained in our election statement, all the major upheavals of the working class in North America, from the Knights of Labor through the sit-down strikes of the 1930s and the mass social struggles of the 1960s, galvanized support on both sides of the Canada-US border, including among the French-speaking workers of Quebec. The task today is to appropriate the best elements of these traditions of joint struggle and infuse them with a new, higher socialist content. On May Day 2025, take up the fight to win the working class to the program of socialist internationalism and for workers North America, the only progressive answer to war, oligarchy, and dictatorship, by joining the ranks of the International Committee of the Fourth International, the World Trotskyist movement, and its socialist equality parties and affiliated sympathizing groups. Thank you.
Today's May Day rally has focused on the central themes of the world capitalist crisis: the turn by governments internationally towards dictatorial forms of rule, in a violent realignment of the state to correspond with the true character of class relations under modern capitalism, the development of trade war and preparation of ever bloodier military conflicts, rooted in the drive by the imperialist powers for a new redivision of the world, the normalization of genocide, the squandering of trillions of dollars which could be spent alleviating poverty and want on rearmament programs on a scale not seen since the Second World War, the cultivation of fascist movements, nationalism, xenophobia, and all forms of backwardness to divide and smash an emerging movement of the international working class. We have analysed these dangers not as passive observers, but as fighters for the socialist alternative. We have presented a political perspective for the working class that you will find nowhere else. Now it's time to decide what you're going to do. Our speakers have stressed the central importance of building a revolutionary leadership in the working class to prepare for the struggles that lie ahead. In the end, that is what will decide the future of humanity. And we appeal to you this May Day to take up this challenge. Establish a rank-and-file committee at your workplace as part of the International Workers' Alliance of rank-and-file committees, the new form of organisation required by the working class to wage a global struggle in defence of jobs and living standards, and against trade war and imperialist war. Contact the International Committee of the Fourth International, the Socialist Equality Parties, and the International Youth and Students for Social Equality, and join the fight to build the Trotskyist movement to put an end to capitalism. Set up a regular monthly donation to the World Socialist Web Site, the indispensable tool for the education and organisation of the international working class in the 21st century. Expand your Marxist library by purchasing literature from Mering Books and educate yourself on the history of the socialist movement. And remember, we do not have unlimited time. Our speakers have explained the methods of fascism and military violence now being employed by the ruling class to deal with their crisis. And we must stop this catastrophe by overthrowing the world's capitalist governments, expropriating the oligarchy, and building a world socialist society based on freedom and social equality. Make May Day 2025 the day you committed to joining the fight for socialism.
If the working class is mobilized, we can shut down the war machines, shut the whole system down. To build the Fourth International means to build the fight to save the human race.
There should be a different system. A system where it's not a small percentage of people gouge out the profits and leave most of the workers barely able to live, needing 2 and 3 jobs just to survive. We should have a system, a socialist system, where people can get a decent pay instead of doing 2 and 3 jobs. We should use our time for leisure and education.
Together and organized, we are much stronger than, a dozen or 2 dozen or even 1,000 oligarchs. We need to expropriate the billionaires and redirect society's resources to improving the lot of mankind in general.
The working class movement needs to be an international movement. We need to break down those nationalistic ideas in order to gain solidarity with our brothers and sisters throughout the world.
So it would be great if all the workers could start looking around at each other as comrades and people that can help and get mad at the people above us instead of each other. We can do this. We can become our own masters of our destinies.
Without the working class, the ruling class and the bourgeoisie have nothing and are nothing. So the working class have that huge latent power to seize the means of production, to use them for the good of all humankind.
Whatever difference you have with anybody else, none of that matters because we're all going through the same exact thing. We're all saying the same thing, so it's time to come together and make the change.
Workers need to come together on an international scale. Join the fight for socialism. Join the party to stop this drive to war, to stop the rise of fascism, overthrow this broken system that has long run its course.
The working class is the biggest revolutionary force we have. Workers are brave people. They all see what's going wrong. They just need leadership. So the Socialist Equality Party is doing a great job with that. Workers of the world unite.